My own flesh and blood shoved me down the steep hardwood stairs of the very home I built with my bare hands. As I lay at the bottom with my ribs cracked and blood pooling around my head, my daughter-in-law looked down into the darkness and sneered. "Leave him," she said. "Let him rot down there. By morning he will be begging us to sign over the estate." They locked the heavy oak door and left me in the dark. They thought they had buried a helpless older man. They had no idea I was holding a burner phone in my pocket and a plan that would systematically destroy their entire world. The argument started in the grand foyer of my estate in Chicago. It is a custom-built property on the south side. Every brick, every beam, every piece of crown molding was paid for by 40 years of my sweat, my calloused hands, and my relentless grind. I navigated a world that never wanted to see a black mechanic and dealership owner win. I built an auto empire from the dirt up, and standing in the middle of that empire was Jamal, the son I gave everything to, demanding I hand it all over to him on a silver platter. Jamal paced the marble floor, his face red, waving a stack of legal documents in my face. "Just sign the deed, Dad," he barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "It is just a formality. You are getting older. You are forgetting things. Tasha and I just want to protect the family assets." I stood there leaning slightly on my oak cane, staring at the boy I raised. He wore a designer suit bought with my money, a luxury watch paid for by my credit, and an arrogant expression he learned all on his own. Beside him stood his wife, Tasha. She stood with her arms crossed, her designer handbag dangling from her wrist, tapping her expensive high heels against my immaculate floors. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet, paid for by the secondary credit card I had foolishly trusted them with. She had a look of sheer entitlement plastered across her face, a look that told me she already considered my home her personal property. "Protect the assets," I repeated, keeping my voice steady and dangerously low. "You mean liquidate the assets? You mean sell the home your mother and I designed so you can cover up whatever financial mess you have dragged yourselves into this time?" I looked at the papers shaking in his hand. I could see the crisp edges of the transfer documents. The legal letterhead belonged to a cheap downtown firm, the kind that asked no questions if the retainer was large enough. "You want to erase my name from the deeds of my 5 commercial auto lots. You want to trade a family legacy for a quick pile of cash." Jamal flinched. The truth always makes a liar flinch. "Dad." "You are not thinking straight," he insisted, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You do not need a massive estate. We need liquidity. We need to secure the future. Sign the paper." I looked at the documents again. A complete transfer of the deed and a total power of attorney. A blank check to my entire life of hard work. I looked Jamal dead in the eye and delivered my final answer. "Not as long as I have breath in my lungs. You will not get a single dime, and you will certainly not get this house." Tasha scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Jamal," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "I told you reasoning with him is a waste of time. He is a stubborn, senile old fool. He does not understand what is at stake here. The buyers are waiting, and we do not have time for his episodes." I turned my gaze to her. "Do not speak to me in my own house, Tasha. You have done nothing but leech off my hard work since the day you married my son. You disrespect the very floor you stand on." That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Jamal lost his mind. "Do not talk to my wife like that," he yelled, lunging forward. I stood my ground, gripping my cane. I had faced down absolute hell to build my life in this city. I was not going to back down from a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. But I did not anticipate the sheer cowardice of his next move. We were standing near the hallway that led to the basement. The heavy oak door was propped open. Jamal grabbed my jacket collar with both hands. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated greed and desperation in his eyes. He did not see his father. He saw a roadblock. He saw an obstacle standing between him and my millions. Sign the paper, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. Never, I whispered. Jamal shoved me. It was not a light push. It was a violent two-handed thrust, filled with decades of suppressed resentment and raw, blinding panic. My cane slipped on the polished marble. My feet flew out from under me. I felt the horrifying sensation of weightlessness as I tipped backward into the dark stairwell. The fall was brutal. I hit the first wooden step with my lower back, the impact driving the breath from my lungs in a sharp gasp. I tumbled downward, a chaotic blur of sharp edges and hard surfaces. My shoulders smashed against the handrail. My knees slammed into the corner of a step. I tried to reach out to break my fall, but gravity and momentum were merciless. I tumbled down the entire flight of hardwood stairs, violently colliding with the solid concrete floor at the bottom. A sickening crack echoed in the damp air of the basement. Searing, blinding pain ripped through my ribcage. I gasped for air, but my lungs refused to expand. My head bounced against the concrete, and a warm, sticky liquid immediately began to pool around my hairline, soaking into my collar. I lay there in the dim light, paralyzed by the agonizing pain radiating through my entire body. Every breath felt like shattered glass piercing my chest. I blinked, trying to clear the blurry double vision. I forced my eyes open and looked up the long, steep flight of stairs. Jamal stood at the top, his chest heaving, his hands hovering in the air as if he could not believe what he had just done. For a fraction of a second, I waited for the panic of a son who had just accidentally hurt his father. I waited for him to rush down the stairs to pull out his phone to call an ambulance, but he did not move. He just stared down at me. The panic in his eyes slowly morphed into something much darker. It morphed into cold calculation. Tasha stepped into the frame, standing right beside him. She looked down the stairwell, her eyes narrowing as she peered into the shadows where I lay bleeding. She did not gasp. She did not scream. She simply evaluated the situation like a predator examining a wounded animal. "Jamal, what did you do?" she whispered, though there was no fear in her voice. Just a pragmatic assessment. He would not listen to reason? Jamal stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "He is going to ruin everything. Tasha, the deadline is Friday. If we do not get this house, we are dead." Tasha looked down at me again. Our eyes met through the gloom. I was unable to speak, struggling just to draw a shallow breath, but my mind was razor sharp. I saw the exact moment her morality vanished entirely, replaced by absolute sociopathic greed. "Leave him," she said, her voice echoing down the wooden stairwell, chilling me to the bone. Jamal turned to her in shock. "What, we cannot just leave him there. He is bleeding. He is fine," Tasha sneered, waving her hand dismissively. "He is a tough old man. Let him rot down there. The cold concrete will change his mind. By morning he will be begging us to sign the power of attorney. We will tell the police he had a confused episode and took a bad fall. It perfectly fits the dementia narrative." Jamal hesitated for only a single second where he weighed the life of the father who had sacrificed everything for him against the money he desperately needed. Money won. He looked down at me one last time, his face hardened. "Maybe this will get the message across, Dad," he said coldly. Then he reached for the heavy oak door. Slam. The noise echoed like a gunshot in the confined space of the basement. Then came the sound that finalized their betrayal. Click. The heavy deadbolt sliding into place. I was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The basement was soundproofed, thick walls of concrete and earth separating me from the rest of the world. To Jamal and Tasha, I was a defeated, helpless older man trapped in a dark hole slowly bleeding out, waiting to be broken. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed my silence was shock. They assumed my stillness was defeat. I did not scream for help. I did not bang my fists against the stairs. I knew better than to waste my limited breath on people who had just tried to kill me. Through the searing pain of my cracked ribs, I slowly reached my trembling, blood-stained hand into the inner pocket of my tailored vest. My fingers wrapped around a small plastic rectangular object. It was a burner flip phone, unregistered and entirely untraceable. I had bought it 3 months ago when I first noticed the discrepancies in Jamal banking behavior and the strange vehicles parking near my estate. I flipped it open in the dark. The small, harsh backlight illuminated my bloodied hands. I pressed the speed dial button, number 1. The line rang once, twice. Then a sharp, professional woman answered. Yes, it was Maya. She was not just a niece. She was a ruthless, terrifyingly brilliant corporate attorney, a woman who treated the legal system like a battlefield. More importantly, she possessed a loyalty that Jamal could not even begin to comprehend. Maya. I wheezed, my voice raspy, fighting against the agony in my chest. It is Uncle Isaiah. Isaiah? Her tone shifted instantly, dropping the corporate facade, turning deadly serious. Your voice, what happened? Are you injured? They made their move. I breathed out, wiping a stream of warm blood from my eye. Jamal pushed me. I am locked in the basement. Ribs are broken. Head wound. I heard the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor on her end. I'm calling 911 and sending an ambulance right now. No. I commanded, forcing authority into my shattered voice. Do not call the police. Do not call the paramedics. If the police arrive, Jamal will spin a story. He will use this to fast-track my incompetency hearing. He will say I am a danger to myself. I could hear Maya breathing heavily on the other end, her legal mind processing the tactical situation in a split second. What are your orders, Uncle Isaiah? She asked. Send your private medical extraction team, the silent ones, I replied. Pick the basement window lock. Get me out of here before the sun comes up. Leave no trace that I was ever here except the blood. Understood? Maya said, her voice ice cold. The extraction team is rolling out in 2 minutes. We will have you in a secure suite downtown within the hour. What about Jamal and Tasha? She asked. I stared into the pitch-black void of the basement. I thought about the 40 years of sweat I poured into the city. I thought about the son I had loved and the monster he had become for a taste of unearned wealth. I thought about Tasha sneering down at me, telling my son to let me rot. The pain in my chest subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. The kind of fury that does not shout but silently dismantles entire lives. Maya, I said, gripping the phone tight. Initiate the winter protocol. Consider it done, she replied and hung up. I lay my head back against the cold concrete floor, closing my eyes in the darkness. I was bleeding, broken, and betrayed, but I was not a victim. Jamal and Tasha thought they had buried a helpless old man. They did not realize they had just dug their own graves. The cold concrete of the basement floor was seeping into my bones. Every breath I took felt like a jagged piece of iron tearing through my chest. 2 broken ribs, I calculated maybe 3. The blood trickling from my hairline had started to dry, forming a sticky, uncomfortable crust against my temple. I lay there in the pitch-black darkness of the house I had built from the ground up, listening to the absolute silence. I did not close my eyes. If I closed my eyes, I might not open them again. A man who survives the harsh streets of Chicago and builds an auto empire from scratch does not die in the dark at the hands of a spoiled child. I focused on the small, high window near the ceiling of the basement. It was the only exit point, a narrow rectangle of reinforced glass that looked out into the dense bushes of the backyard. I waited. Time lost its meaning. The agonizing pain in my chest was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Then a faint scraping sound broke the silence. It was not coming from the stairs, it was coming from the window. A sliver of moonlight pierced the darkness as the latch on the reinforced glass was quietly, expertly picked. The window swung open without a single creak. 3 figures slipped into my basement like shadows. They wore dark tactical gear, completely silent, moving with a disciplined precision that told me exactly who they were. Maya did not send paramedics. She sent a private extraction team, the kind of professionals who do not ask questions and leave zero evidence behind. One of the shadows knelt beside me. A gloved hand gently pressed against my neck, checking my pulse. I felt the sharp prick of a needle in my arm, delivering a strong painkiller that instantly took the edge off the agony in my chest. They did not speak a single word. They unrolled a compact, rigid stretcher and smoothly shifted my broken body onto it. I gritted my teeth, swallowing the groan that threatened to escape my throat. Within minutes, they hoisted me up through the narrow window frame. The cool night air of Chicago hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating dampness of the basement. They loaded me into the back of an unmarked black van parked silently in the alley behind my estate. The doors closed, plunging me into darkness once more, but this time it was the darkness of salvation. The engine purred to life, and we vanished into the night long before the sun even thought about rising over the city skyline. When I finally opened my eyes again, the harsh smell of medical antiseptic filled my lungs. I was no longer in the back of a van. I was lying in a high-tech adjustable medical bed inside a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun was pouring in, illuminating the sleek modern furniture. This was not a hospital room. It was a secure penthouse suite in the heart of downtown Chicago, owned by a shell company controlled by Maya. A private doctor was finishing wrapping a tight bandage around my ribcage. He checked the stitches on my forehead, nodded to someone out of my line of sight, and quietly exited the room. Maya stepped into my view. She wore a sharp navy blue designer suit, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. "You have 3 fractured ribs and a severe concussion. Uncle Isaiah," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "the doctor says you are lucky to be alive. That fall should have killed a man your age." "I am not just any man," I replied, my voice raspy but steady. "And Jamal is a fool. He always lacked the strength to finish what he started." Maya walked over to the bedside table and picked up a sleek black tablet. She handed it to me. "The extraction team scrubbed the window frame," she explained. "They left no fingerprints, no fibers, nothing. The only thing left in that basement is the puddle of your blood. I have my security team monitoring the perimeter of your estate. Now we wait for them to make their next mistake." I took the tablet in my hands. The screen was divided into a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds. The living room, the kitchen, the grand foyer, the home office, the hallway, and the basement stairs. I'd installed these micro cameras 3 months ago. I am a mechanic and a builder by trade. I know how to hide wiring inside crown molding so perfectly that even a trained electrician would miss it. I put them in when I first noticed my bank statements had been moved on my desk, and when I caught Jamal lingering too long near my safe. I wanted to know what my son was looking for. Now those cameras were going to be the instrument of his absolute destruction. I tapped the screen, enlarging the feed from the kitchen. It was 8 in the morning. Jamal and Tasha walked into the kitchen. The contrast between my shattered ribs and their comfortable morning routine was a bitter pill to swallow. Tasha was wearing her expensive silk robe, pouring a cup of artisan coffee from my espresso machine. She looked completely relaxed, a smug smile playing on her pale lips. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. Jamal, however, looked like a man standing on the gallows. He wore the same clothes from the night before. His hair was messy and he was pacing the kitchen floor, rubbing the back of his neck. "Stop pacing, Jamal," Tasha said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "You are making me nervous." I pushed my own father down a flight of stairs. Tasha Jamal snapped, his voice trembling through the hidden microphone I had embedded in the kitchen chandelier. "What if he's dead? What if he bled out during the night?" Tasha rolled her eyes, placing her coffee mug on the marble counter. "If he is dead, it makes our job easier. We wipe up the blood, call the coroner, and say he had a tragic accident falling down the stairs because of his declining mental state. The house becomes yours instantly. If he is alive, he has spent the last 10 hours freezing in the dark. He will be begging for a glass of water and a pen to sign that power of attorney. Either way, we win. We sell this house, we pay off Dante Vance, and we get our lives back." Jamal took a deep, shaky breath, nodding slowly as he let her venomous logic wash over him. He always was weak-willed, easily manipulated by anyone who offered him a shortcut. "Let us go get this over with," Jamal said. I watched the screen intently. I tapped the tablet to switch to the hallway camera. Jamal and Tasha walked toward the heavy oak door that led to the basement. Jamal reached out his hand, shaking visibly as he turned the deadbolt. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open. The darkness of the stairwell stared back at them. "Dad!" Jamal called out, his voice cracking. "Dad! Are you ready to be reasonable?" Silence. Jamal reached over and flipped the light switch. The harsh fluorescent bulbs illuminated the long wooden staircase and the concrete floor at the bottom. From the penthouse, I watched their faces on the high-definition feed. I saw the exact moment the smug confidence drained completely from Tasha's face. I saw Jamal's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror. The basement was empty. Jamal scrambled down the wooden steps, nearly tripping over his own feet in his panic. Tasha followed closely behind him, her expensive silk robe trailing on the dusty steps. They reached the bottom. Jamal stared at the large, dark puddle of dried blood on the concrete. He spun around wildly, checking the dark corners of the large basement, looking behind the storage boxes and the old furniture. "He's gone." Jamal gasped, his hands flying to his head. "The blood, Tasha. Look at all this blood. He is gone." "How the hell is he gone?" Tasha shrieked, her composed facade shattering into a million pieces. "You locked the door. I saw you lock the door. There is no other way out of here." Jamal ran over to the small window near the ceiling. He saw that the latch was unlocked. He stumbled backward, his chest heaving with panic. He got out. Jamal stammered, his eyes wide with horror. He climbed out the window. "Tasha, he is out there. He is going to the police. He is going to tell them I pushed him. He is going to show them the blood. They are going to lock me up for attempted murder. We are finished. We are completely finished." Jamal plunged his hand into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "I have to call the police first. I have to control the narrative. I will tell them he attacked me. I will tell them he went crazy." Tasha lunged forward and slapped the phone right out of his hand. The device clattered against the hard concrete floor. "Are you out of your mind?" Tasha screamed, grabbing Jamal by the collar of his shirt. "Look at this floor, Jamal. Look at the amount of blood. You cannot explain away a pool of blood that size by saying an older man went crazy. If the cops come down here and see this, we go to jail. They will arrest you for attempted murder, and they will arrest me as an accessory. We will spend the rest of our lives in a federal prison." Jamal was hyperventilating now, completely losing his grip on reality. "Then what do we do, Tasha? Tell me what we do. The men are coming for their money on Friday. If we do not sell this house, Dante Vance is going to kill us. And if my father goes to the cops, we go to prison. We have nothing." Tasha took a deep breath, forcing her panic down, her sociopathic survival instincts taking over. She grabbed Jamal by the face, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. "Listen to me," she commanded, her voice cold and sharp. "We clean up this blood. We scrub this concrete until it shines. We bleach every single step. We leave zero evidence that he was ever down here." "And then what?" Jamal whispered. "We stick to the plan," Tasha said, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Your father is a 75-year-old man. We will tell everyone his mind has been slipping. We will say he has severe dementia. We will say he woke up in the middle of the night, confused, and wandered off into the streets of Chicago. We file a missing person report with the police. Once he is officially missing, and with the doctor's note we are paying for, we take emergency control of the estate. We sell the house to the buyers. We take the cash, and we disappear before anyone figures it out." Jamal stared at her, terrified by the sheer audacity of the lie, but too cowardly to refuse it. He nodded slowly. "Okay, we clean it up. We say he wandered off. I sat in the sterile medical bed in the luxury penthouse miles away from the basement where they were planning my demise. My cracked ribs ached, but I did not feel the pain anymore. I only felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a hunter watching his prey step willingly into a steel trap. I looked down at the tablet in my hands. The camera feed was crystal clear. Every desperate word, every panicked confession, every detail of their conspiracy was playing out in real time. Maya stood beside my bed, watching the screen over my shoulder. "They are incredibly stupid," she noted quietly. "They are desperate," I corrected her, "and desperate people always dig their own graves. They just need someone to hand them the shovel." I raised a single finger and tapped the red glowing icon on the corner of the tablet screen. Recording saved. Jamal and Tasha thought they were erasing the evidence. They thought they were building a perfect lie to steal my auto empire and my life. They had no idea that they had just documented their own criminal conspiracy on a secure cloud server legally admissible in any courtroom in the state of Illinois. I locked the tablet and placed it on the bedside table. The game was no longer about survival. It was about absolute systematic destruction. Let them clean the blood. Let them tell their lies. I was going to let them build their house of cards as high as they possibly could, because when the time was right, I was going to burn it to the ground with them inside it. All I had to do was wait for their next move. The ghost of Isaiah was officially haunting them, and they had absolutely no idea. The penthouse suite was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Maya working on her laptop. I lay in the medical bed, my chest tightly bandaged, the dull ache in my ribs, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had just survived. I stared at the tablet in my hands, watching the live camera feeds from my own house. Jamal and Tasha were scrubbing the basement floor, frantically wiping away the blood I had shed. They looked like cornered rats. I watched the son I had raised from a boy to a man scrub my blood off the concrete, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. I built my dealership empire from absolutely nothing. Chicago was not a kind city to a young black man trying to turn wrenches and sell cars in the 1970s. I fought for every single inch of dirt I stood on. I worked 18-hour days in the blistering winter cold. I dealt with banks that refused to give me loans, suppliers who tried to overcharge me, and competitors who wanted to see me fail. But I survived. I built a multi-million-dollar company with my calloused hands and my unbreakable will. I did it all for him. I wanted Jamal to have the luxury of wearing a custom suit instead of grease-stained coveralls. I wanted him to walk into boardrooms not under the hood of a broken engine. I gave him the best private schools, the most expensive cars, and a life entirely free of the struggles I had endured. But I made a fatal mistake. I gave him everything. And in doing so, I taught him the value of absolutely nothing. He grew soft. He grew entitled. He thought the world owed him a living just because his last name was the same as mine. He squandered every opportunity I handed him, choosing shortcuts and easy money over hard work and integrity. And when the easy money ran out, he chose to push his own father down a flight of stairs. Maya did not just sit beside me to keep me company. She was a predator in a tailored suit, and right now she was hunting. She was running a complete financial autopsy on Jamal and his precious wife. We were not just going to watch them panic. We were going to dig into the deepest, darkest corners of their lives and find exactly what drove them to attempted murder. "Let us see what your son has been hiding," Maya said, her eyes fixed on her laptop screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, breaking through firewalls and accessing public financial footprints, bank records, and digital trails. The truth she uncovered was far worse than a simple case of greed. It was a masterpiece of pathetic failure. Jamal always bragged about his logistics company at our family dinners. He wore expensive watches and drove a luxury sport utility vehicle, acting like a modern visionary. Maya pulled up the company records. The business was a complete sham. It was a hollow shell. Jamal was running a small-scale Ponzi scheme. He had no actual fleet of trucks, no real revenue. He was simply taking money from new, gullible investors to pay off the old ones, skimming off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. The walls were closing in on him. The investors were starting to ask questions, threatening lawsuits, demanding their money back. He was completely bankrupt, drowning in a sea of lies. But the real rot, the true catalyst for this nightmare, came from his wife. Tasha always acted like she was better than everyone else. She looked down her nose at me, disgusted by the grease on my hands and the history of my struggles. She spent her days at exclusive country clubs, sipping champagne and pretending she belonged to the elite class. Maya pulled up a series of encrypted bank transfers and offshore routing numbers. Tasha had a severe, uncontrollable gambling addiction, but she did not play at the legal casinos. She did not play games where the house simply takes your money. Tasha played at illegal underground tables hidden in the wealthy suburbs of Chicago. And she had lost terribly. "She owes a staggering $200,000, Maya said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And she does not owe it to a bank. She owes it to Dante Vance." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the room. Dante Vance was a violent, ruthless mob boss operating out of the shadows of the city. He did not send collection letters. He sent men with baseball bats. He was known for breaking bones, burning down businesses, and making people disappear before he ever asked for his money twice. Tasha had played with fire, and now the flames were licking at their heels. They were in debt to monsters, and they had decided that my life was the price they needed to pay to survive. I looked back at the tablet screen. Jamal and Tasha had finished cleaning the basement. They were now standing in my grand living room. Jamal was pacing back and forth, his hands shaking visibly. Tasha was biting her nails, the arrogant mask she always wore completely shattered. Suddenly, Jamal's phone rang. The noise made them both jump. I turned up the volume on the tablet. The audio from the hidden microphone embedded in the living room chandelier was crystal clear. Jamal looked at the caller identification on his screen and his face went ghost white. He looked at Tasha, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Answer it," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Put it on speaker." Jamal hit the button with a shaking finger. The voice that echoed through my beautiful living room was rough, gravelly, and laced with casual violence. It was Dante Vance himself. "Jamal," the voice rasped. "You have been dodging my calls. I do not like it when people dodge my calls." "Dante, listen to me," Jamal stammered, his voice pathetic and weak. "I am getting the money. I promise you, we just need a few more days. There has been a complication, but we are fixing it right now." Dante cut him off with a harsh, cruel laugh. "I do not care about your complications, Jamal. I do not care about your excuses. Your wife sat at my tables, drank my liquor, and lost $200,000 of my money. The deadline is this Friday at midnight. I am not giving you another extension. Please, Jamal begged, tears actually forming in his eyes. Just give us until Monday. We are selling the estate. We will have the cash. Friday at midnight, Dante repeated, ignoring the plea completely. If I do not have my money in cash by then, I am sending my boys to your house. We will start with Tasha. We will take a sledgehammer to her knees. She will never walk in those expensive high heels again. And you, Jamal, you will not live to see Saturday morning. We will make an example out of both of you. Do you understand me? Yes, Jamal whispered, sobbing now. Yes, I understand. The line went dead. Jamal dropped the phone on the hardwood floor. He collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his hands. Tasha stumbled backward, hitting the wall and sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. She was hyperventilating, grabbing her own legs as if she could already feel the sledgehammer crushing her bones. "We are dead!" Tasha screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "They are going to kill us, Jamal. You promised me you would handle this. You promised me the old man would sign the papers." "I tried," Jamal shouted back, pointing toward the basement door. But he refused. And now he is gone. We do not have the signature. We do not have the deed. Tasha crawled over to him, grabbing the collar of his shirt and shaking him violently. "We have to sell this house today. Do you hear me? We have cash buyers waiting. We just need the legal authority to sign the closing documents. We have to sell the house immediately to save our own skin." How, Jamal cried out. He climbed out the window. "If we try to sell the house, the title company will demand to see him. They will demand proof of his consent." Tasha wiped her tears and stood up, looking around my living room as if she already owned it. "We stick to the plan," she said, her voice hard and desperate. "We need him declared legally incompetent, and we need him declared missing. We get the corrupt doctor over here today. We pay him whatever he wants to sign the affidavit saying your father has severe dementia and wandered away from home. We take that paper to the judge. We get emergency guardianship over the estate, and we sell the property before Friday." I sat in my medical bed listening to every single word. The pieces of the puzzle had finally clicked into place. They were not just greedy. They were desperate animals backed into a corner by ruthless criminals. They needed to sell my custom-built Chicago estate immediately. But to do that, they needed me erased from the picture. They needed me to be a broken, wandering, incompetent old man. They thought they were racing against the clock. They thought they had a solid plan to outsmart the system, the mob, and me. They thought they were in control of the narrative. I looked over at Maya. She closed her laptop, a terrifying, predatory smile spreading across her face. "We have their motive," she said softly. "We have their timeline. They need you to be a ghost, Uncle Isaiah." I nodded, resting my head against the pillows. I stared at the camera feed, watching my son pace the floor of my home, plotting to steal my life's work to save himself from the mess he created. "Let them bring their fake doctor," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Let them build their perfect lie. They think they are fighting for their lives against the mob. They do not know that the real threat is not coming from the shadows of the city. The real threat is watching their every move. They want me to be a ghost. I will be their worst nightmare." I watched the live camera feed from my secure penthouse suite. Jamal and Tasha were running around my house like trapped rats, trying to figure out how to fake a medical document. They thought their biggest problem was the mob debt. They thought the ticking clock was the deadline set by the violent syndicate. They had absolutely no idea that I was holding the real ticking clock in the palm of my hand. When you build a dealership empire from the dirt up, you learn a very important lesson about machinery. You do not always need a sledgehammer to bring down a running engine. Sometimes all you have to do is locate the main fuel lines and cut them off. Water power, oxygen. For the last 5 years, I had been the sole provider of oxygen to Jamal and Tasha. I was the silent engine keeping their pathetic, glamorous lifestyle afloat. I paid for the grand illusion they projected to the world, and now I was going to turn it all off. Maya walked into my room holding a thick stack of manila folders. She placed them gently on the adjustable table over my medical bed. The sunlight from the floor to ceiling windows reflected off the sleek fountain pen she handed me. "These are the main supply lines, Uncle Isaiah," she said, her voice calm and clinical. "Every single financial cord connecting your accounts to their lifestyle is right here." I looked down at the crisp white papers. For half a decade, I had been silently covering Jamal's luxury car lease. I paid the exorbitant premiums on their top-tier health insurance. I even paid the thousands of dollars in monthly maintenance fees for Tasha's exclusive country club membership in downtown Chicago. Jamal always told her his logistics startup was paying for it. He took all the credit, but the money always came directly from my personal accounts. I had done it because I wanted my son to have a safety net. I wanted his wife to feel accepted in those high society circles that used to lock me out of their restaurants when I was a young man. But a safety net is for people who fall by accident. Jamal and Tasha jumped willingly into a pit of greed, and they tried to throw me down a flight of stairs to cushion their landing. I looked at my bruised hands, the knuckles thick with decades of hard labor. I took the pen. I did not hesitate for a single second. With a few swift, heavy strokes of ink, I signed my name. I canceled the car lease. I canceled the health insurance. I revoked the automatic payments to the country club. I froze the secondary credit cards Tasha used to buy her designer dresses and expensive shoes. I did it all with zero warning. There would be no phone calls to explain. There would be no grace period, just an immediate, brutal financial blackout. Maya gathered the papers, a sharp, predatory smile forming on her lips. "The cancellations are effective immediately," she said. "The banks and the vendors are being notified as we speak." I leaned back against my pillows, the dull ache in my broken ribs fading as a cold, calculating satisfaction took over my body. Let the suffocation begin. 2 hours later, the heavy impact of my signatures hit the ground. I did not need a hidden camera to know exactly how it played out because Maya had sources everywhere in the city, including the elite clubs downtown. Tasha was sitting on the sunlit, manicured terrace of her exclusive country club. She was surrounded by 3 of her wealthy, entitled friends. They were drinking expensive mimosas and eating imported caviar under the shade of a large umbrella. Tasha was holding court, acting like the undisputed queen of Chicago society. According to the club staff, she was bragging loudly about her upcoming real estate windfall. She told her friends that she and Jamal were about to close a massive, multi-million-dollar deal on a custom estate. She conveniently left out the fact that the estate was my home and the deal was a desperate attempt to pay off a violent mob boss so her legs would not be broken with a baseball bat. She laughed, tossing her hair back, reveling in the admiration of women who measured a person's worth entirely by their bank account. Then the waiter arrived. He carried a silver tray holding the brunch bill. It was over $800. Tasha did not even bother to look at the receipt. She waved her hand dismissively and dropped her shiny platinum credit card onto the tray. She continued her story, basking in her own fake glory. A few minutes later, the waiter returned. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. He leaned in close to Tasha and whispered that her card had been declined. Tasha scoffed, clearly irritated by the interruption. She loudly blamed a bank error, eager to save face in front of her judgmental friends. She dug into her designer purse and pulled out a backup gold card. She tossed it onto the tray with an arrogant eye roll, telling the waiter to try again and be quick about it. The waiter scurried away, his face pale. When he came back the second time, he was not alone. He was accompanied by the general manager of the country club. The manager was a stern, uncompromising man who tolerated zero nonsense from delinquent members. He did not whisper. He stood right next to Tasha's table, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear perfectly well. I am sorry, Mrs. Sterling, the manager said coldly. Both of your cards have been declined. Furthermore, I have just been notified by our accounting department that your membership dues have been permanently revoked by your primary sponsor. The account is frozen. Tasha went completely pale. Her friends stopped drinking their mimosas. The clinking of glasses on the terrace stopped. The entire outdoor dining area fell dead silent. Every single wealthy patron was watching her. What are you talking about? Tasha stammered, her face turning crimson with deep, inescapable embarrassment. There must be a mistake. My husband is a very successful executive. The manager did not flinch. His tone was sharp and unyielding. There is no mistake, ma'am, he replied. Your membership is officially suspended due to unpaid dues and a sudden cancellation of the guarantor account. You will need to provide an alternative form of payment for this $800 bill immediately, or I will be forced to call the authorities. Tasha was hyperventilating. The wealthy women she had been trying to impress just moments ago were now looking at her with absolute disgust and sheer pity. She fumbled through her purse, her hands shaking uncontrollably, pulling out lipsticks and compact mirrors, but she had no cash. She had absolutely nothing. She had to turn to the woman next to her and beg her friend to cover the bill, humiliating herself completely in front of the exact people she wanted to rule over. She grabbed her bag and practically ran off the terrace, tears of pure shame and panic streaming down her face. The grand illusion was shattered. The entire club knew she was a total fraud. She stormed out to the country club parking lot, sobbing hysterically as her expensive heels clicked against the pavement. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jamal, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely press the screen. She needed her husband to fix this. She needed him to make the embarrassment go away. Miles away in the downtown commercial district, Jamal was sitting in his rented office space. He was already sweating profusely, pacing back and forth as he tried to figure out how to forge the medical documents they needed to steal my house. His phone started ringing. He saw Tasha's name on the screen. He let out an exhausted sigh, rubbing his temples before answering. He tried to calm her down as she screamed into the phone about the declined cards and the terrible public humiliation. He told her there must be a glitch with the bank systems. He promised her he would go downstairs to his car, drive to the bank in person, and sort everything out immediately. Jamal grabbed his leather briefcase, his heart racing with the mounting pressure of the mob debt and his failing plans. He walked out the glass doors of his office building and stepped onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. The afternoon sun was beating down on the pavement. He looked toward the spot on the street where he always parked his pristine, fully loaded luxury sport utility vehicle. But the parking spot was not empty. A large, heavy-duty tow truck was idling right in front of the building, its yellow lights flashing. And hoisted up into the air, securely hooked to the back of the tow truck, was his precious luxury vehicle. Jamal dropped his briefcase. The fake paperwork for his logistics company scattered across the concrete pavement, blowing in the wind. He stood there completely paralyzed, holding his phone to his ear, while Tasha continued to cry on the other end of the line. "Wait, stop!" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He ran toward the street, waving his arms at the tow truck driver. "That is my car. You cannot take my car." The driver rolled down the window, looking down at Jamal with absolute indifference. "The leasing company canceled the contract an hour ago, buddy," he said. "Take it up with them." The driver rolled the window back up and hit the gas. Jamal stood frozen on the sidewalk as pedestrians walked past him, staring at the man in the expensive suit, having a complete breakdown. He watched the tow truck pull away, carrying his ultimate status symbol down the busy Chicago street, disappearing into the heavy city traffic. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the ground. He had no car. He had no money. He had no power. He was entirely defenseless. The oxygen was gone and the suffocation had officially begun. The walls of my estate were closing in on my son. I watched the live camera feed from the comfort of my secure penthouse suite. Jamal had just returned to the house after watching his luxury sport utility vehicle get towed away from his office. He did not take a cab. He had to ride the public bus back to the south side because Tasha had called him sobbing that all her credit cards were completely frozen. They were utterly broke. The illusion of their massive wealth had evaporated in a matter of hours, and hanging over their heads was the heavy shadow of Dante Vance. The deadline was Friday. Dante was not a man who made empty threats. Jamal and Tasha were sitting on the expensive leather sofa in my living room, shaking with pure terror. They knew that if they did not hand over $200,000 in cash by midnight on Friday, men with baseball bats would arrive at the front door. They needed to sell my custom-built Chicago estate immediately. But to sell a house that belonged to me, they needed the legal authority to sign the deed. They needed the world to believe that Isaiah was a broken, incompetent old man who had lost his mind and wandered off into the city. Jamal paced the hardwood floor of the living room, wiping sweat from his forehead. He told Tasha that they needed to accelerate their timeline. They could not wait for the police to find me. They could not wait for a legitimate medical evaluation. They needed an official incompetency affidavit today. Tasha, her eyes red from crying after her humiliation at the country club, agreed. She told Jamal to call the doctor they had spoken to weeks ago. A corrupt psychiatrist who was known in the wealthy suburbs for providing whatever medical documentation you needed as long as the price was right. But there was a massive problem. The corrupt doctor demanded a $10,000 bribe to commit medical fraud, and Jamal did not have $10,000. I had cut off his oxygen. I had frozen the accounts. Jamal sat at my mahogany dining table with his laptop, desperately searching for quick cash. I watched him through the hidden camera as he applied for a high-interest payday loan online. It was the kind of predatory loan that destroys working-class families with an astronomical interest rate. But Jamal had no choice. He used his fake logistics company as collateral and managed to secure a $10,000 instant cash advance. He drove his wife's leased sedan to a sketchy check-cashing storefront to withdraw the physical bills. An hour later, Jamal returned to my house with a thick manila envelope. Shortly after the doorbell rang, it was the corrupt psychiatrist. I watched the camera feed closely as Jamal and Tasha ushered the man into my grand foyer. He wore a sharp gray suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase, but he had the nervous energy of a common thief. They led him into the formal dining room, the very room where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners and celebrated milestones. Now it was the staging ground for a felony. Maya sat next to my medical bed, her eyes glued to her own monitor. She adjusted the audio feed so we could hear every single word with crystal clarity. Jamal placed the manila envelope on the polished mahogany table and pushed it toward the doctor. He told the man that there were $10,000 in unmarked hundreds inside. The doctor did not even hesitate. He reached out, pulled the stack of cash from the envelope, and quickly flipped through the bills with his thumb. Satisfied, he placed the money inside his briefcase and pulled out a blank legal document. It was a preliminary incompetency affidavit, a powerful legal instrument designed to strip a person of their autonomy. The doctor clicked his expensive pen and looked at Tasha. He asked her exactly what she wanted the medical evaluation to say. Tasha leaned forward, her voice devoid of any human empathy. She coached the dirty doctor with chilling precision. She told him to write that Isaiah suffers from advanced dementia. She told him to document that I had exhibited severe, unpredictable, violent outbursts over the past several months. She instructed him to write that my mental decline was irreversible and that I had completely lost my grip on reality, eventually wandering away from the property in a state of total delirium. The doctor simply nodded. He did not ask for my medical records. He did not ask to search the house. He did not care that he was effectively erasing a 75-year-old man from society. He pressed his pen to the paper and began to write exactly what Tasha dictated. He filled the official document with malicious lies, diagnosing me with a degenerative brain disease without ever having laid eyes on me. When he was finished, he signed his name at the bottom and stamped the paper with his official medical seal. He handed the fraudulent affidavit to Jamal, stood up, shook my son's hand, and walked out the front door. Jamal held the piece of paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket. He looked at Tasha and told her that their problems were finally over. With this medical document, they could take emergency control of my entire estate. They could sell the house to the mob buyers, pay off the gambling debt, and escape with the leftover cash. They hugged each other in the middle of my dining room, completely oblivious to the trap they had just stepped into. Back in the penthouse suite, Maya leaned back in her chair. She did not look angry. She looked incredibly satisfied. She tapped a few keys on her laptop and smiled. I looked at the screen. We had captured everything. The hidden micro cameras I installed had recorded the entire interaction in stunning high-definition resolution. The hidden microphones had captured the crisp, uncompressed audio of every single word. We had irrefutable evidence of a licensed medical professional accepting a $10,000 cash bribe. We had him committing felony medical fraud conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated elder abuse, all on tape. Maya looked at me and said that we now held the key to destroying not just Jamal and Tasha, but a corrupt doctor who made a living preying on vulnerable senior citizens. She locked the digital files into a secure, encrypted server. The evidence was safe, ready to be deployed the moment the trap was fully sprung. Meanwhile, Jamal wasted absolutely no time. Armed with the fraudulent incompetency affidavit, he grabbed his briefcase and rushed out the door. He was heading straight for the downtown branch of my primary bank. He believed that this piece of paper gave him supreme authority over my life. He believed he was about to access my main checking account, which held hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash. He thought he was walking into that bank as a conqueror. I asked Maya to pull up the financial monitoring software she had established with my bank manager. I had known the branch manager for 20 years. We had already put a special protocol in place for this exact scenario. I closed my eyes and pictured my son walking into that sterile, brightly lit bank lobby. I knew exactly how he would act. He would bypass the regular line. He would demand to see a senior teller or the branch manager. He would carry himself with that same unearned arrogance that had ruined his life. According to the timestamp on our monitoring system, Jamal arrived at the bank at 2 p.m. He walked up to the marble counter and slid the fraudulent medical affidavit across the desk to the senior teller. He spoke in a loud, authoritative voice, declaring that his father Isaiah had been deemed legally incompetent due to severe dementia. He stated that he was assuming immediate emergency control of all family assets. He demanded full access to my primary checking account, instructing the teller to prepare a cashier's check for the maximum allowable amount. The teller, a professional woman who had handled my accounts for years, picked up the legal document. She reviewed the doctor's signature and the official seal. Then she turned to her computer terminal and typed my name into the banking system. Jamal stood there, tapping his fingers impatiently on the marble counter, waiting for his golden ticket to print. He probably envisioned himself paying off Dante Vance and driving away in a brand new luxury vehicle. He felt the heavy weight of his debts lifting off his shoulders. The teller stopped typing. She frowned her eyes, scanning the digital information on her screen. She scrolled down, double-checking the system logs. Then she picked up the fraudulent affidavit and handed it back to Jamal. Jamal looked confused. He asked her if there was a problem with the paperwork. He insisted that the doctor's evaluation was fully certified and granted him immediate power of attorney. The teller looked Jamal dead in the eye, her expression completely flat and unwavering. She told him that there was no problem with the medical paperwork. The problem was with the account itself. She pushed the paper across the marble counter and delivered a sentence that would shatter Jamal's entire reality. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," she said in a clear, polite voice. "But this account no longer exists. It was permanently closed by the primary account holder 2 hours ago." Jamal froze. His hand hovered over the marble counter. His breath hitched in his throat. The sterile sounds of the bank lobby seemed to fade into absolute silence. The teller's words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over again, "closed by the primary account holder 2 hours ago." He stared at the teller, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated horror. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His mind desperately tried to process the impossible information. He had pushed me down a steep flight of hardwood stairs. He had heard my ribs crack. He had seen the pool of blood spreading across the concrete floor. He had locked the heavy oak door and left me to die in the pitch-black basement. He was absolutely certain that I was either dead or wandering the streets in a state of terminal delirium. But dead men do not walk into banks. Dead men do not authorize massive financial transfers. And senile, broken men do not permanently close highly secure checking accounts. The realization hit Jamal like a freight train crashing through his chest. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and trembling. The medical affidavit in his hand suddenly felt like a heavy anchor dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He realized that the missing body in the basement was not a confused old man wandering off into the night. It was a calculated escape. I was not dead. I was not broken. I was alive. I was in total control of my faculties, and I was actively hunting him down. The hunter had just realized he was the prey. The financial oxygen was entirely gone, and the real suffocation had just reached his throat. Let them panic. Let them realize that you cannot bury a man who knows how to dig his way out. The game was escalating, and Jamal was completely outmatched. Jamal drove back to the estate like a man fleeing a burning building. I watched the live feed from my penthouse as his car swerved into the driveway, tires screeching against the pavement. He did not even bother to close the car door. He sprinted up the marble steps, and burst through the front entrance. His chest was heaving, his expensive suit wrinkled and soaked in cold sweat. Tasha was waiting for him in the grand foyer. She had a glass of wine in her hand, trying to steady her nerves after her total humiliation at the country club. She took one look at her husband and knew that the floor had just fallen out from under them. "He is alive," Jamal gasped, leaning heavily against the wall. He closed the accounts. "Tasha, the money is gone." Tasha dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the imported tile-red liquid, pooling around her designer shoes like the blood I had left on the basement floor. "What are you talking about?" she shrieked. "You told me he was bleeding out. You told me he was locked in the dark." Jamal grabbed his hair, pacing wildly. He walked into the bank and shut down the primary checking account 2 hours ago. The teller told me to my face. A man with advanced dementia does not walk into a high-security financial institution and authorize a total account closure. The entire narrative is dead, Tasha. If we go to the police and say he wandered off, they will look at the bank records and know we are lying. If we try to sell the house with that fake medical paper, we will go to federal prison for fraud. He is out there and he is fully aware of everything. Sitting in my medical bed, I watched them implode. Maya stood quietly by the window, her arms crossed, a look of pure satisfaction on her face. The financial suffocation had worked perfectly. But now it was time to turn up the heat. Physical pain is temporary. I knew that from decades of manual labor. But psychological terror, the kind that keeps you awake at night and makes you jump at your own shadow that lasts forever. I wanted my son to feel the exact same terror I felt when I was falling down those hardwood stairs. I reached over to the bedside table and picked up my untraceable burner phone. I typed out a single message and hit send. Down in the living room, Jamal's phone buzzed in his pocket. He flinched as if he had been shocked with electricity. He pulled the phone out with trembling hands. I watched the camera feed as he looked at the screen. The message I sent contained no threats. It contained no anger. It was just a number. $200,000. Jamal stopped breathing. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Tasha noticed his sudden paralysis. She marched over her heels, crunching on the broken glass, and snatched the phone from his hands. She read the message, and the remaining color completely drained from her face. "Who sent this?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Jamal, who sent this number?" I did not give Jamal time to answer. I typed a second message and hit send. Jamal's phone buzzed again in Tasha's hand. She looked down at the screen. The second message contained only 2 words: Dante Vance. The silence that followed in my house was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of 2 people realizing that they were completely trapped. They thought their debt to the violent mob syndicate was their own dirty little secret. They thought I was just an ignorant old man standing in the way of their salvation. Now they knew the truth. I was not just alive. I knew exactly why they needed my money. I knew exactly who held their leash. I knew that if they did not pay $200,000 by Friday midnight, men with baseball bats were coming to break their bones. The predator had just revealed himself, and Jamal finally understood that he was the prey. Tasha turned on him with the viciousness of a cornered animal. She threw the phone at his chest. "You idiot!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty halls of my estate. "He knows. Your father knows everything. He knows about the underground casino. He knows about the debt. He is playing with us." Jamal backed away, holding his hands up defensively. "I did not tell him anything, Tasha. I swear to you, I never said a word about the money we owe." "Then how does he know?" she shrieked, advancing on him, her fingernails digging into his shoulders. "You pushed him down the stairs, Jamal. You tried to kill him for this house, and you failed. You failed, like you fail at everything else. Your startup is a joke. Your money is a joke, and now we are going to be murdered by Friday because you could not finish the job. You have to find him. I do not care what it takes. You find your father and you force him to sign the actual deed to this house." Jamal nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Okay, I will find him. But where do I even look? He could be anywhere in Chicago." I smiled. Jamal was right about one thing. I could be anywhere. But I was not going to hide. Hiding is for the weak. A true hunter steps out into the open to lure the wolves into a snare. I looked at Maya. She nodded, understanding exactly what I was about to do. I slowly swung my legs over the edge of the medical bed. The pain in my chest was sharp, but I ignored it. I stood up, leaning heavily on my silver-handled cane. Maya handed me a freshly pressed, custom-tailored charcoal suit, but I pushed it away. I asked her for something else. I needed to look exactly like the ghost they were searching for. I pulled on a pair of faded, oversized khaki trousers that did not match the stained, moth-eaten brown cardigan I draped over my shoulders. I slipped my feet into a pair of scuffed, worn-out loafers. I messed up my hair, letting it look wild and unkempt. I looked exactly like a man whose mind had slowly unraveled. I left the secure penthouse and had my driver take me to a very specific part of the city. We drove away from the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown and headed toward the south side. We headed toward the old neighborhoods, the streets where I had opened my first small garage, the places where the pavement was cracked and the buildings showed their age. I walked into a small, worn-down diner that had been standing on the same corner for 40 years. It smelled like old grease, strong coffee, and hard work. I walked up to the counter. The waitress asked me what I wanted. I ordered a simple black coffee. She handed me the steaming paper cup and told me it was $2.50. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old joint credit card. It was tied to an account that Jamal had set up secondary alerts for years ago. when he pretended to care about my finances. I handed it to her. The machine beeped, approving the transaction. Miles away inside my grand estate, Jamal was still pacing the living room floor. Suddenly his phone chimed. It was a loud, sharp notification sound. He pulled the phone from his pocket and stared at the screen. It was a banking alert. A transaction for $2.50 at a diner on the south side. A transaction made by Isaiah. Jamal showed the alert to Tasha. Their eyes lit up with a mixture of desperate relief and predatory excitement. They thought I had made a mistake. They thought the senile, broken old man had slipped up and used a trackable card for a cup of coffee. They thought I had wandered back to my old neighborhood out of sheer dementia and nostalgia. Jamal grabbed his keys. Tasha grabbed her purse. They did not hesitate. They ran out the front door, jumping into Tasha's leased sedan. They sped out of the driveway, tires squealing, rushing toward the south side. They were coming to hunt me down. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The bitter, scalding liquid felt grounding. Let them drive fast. Let them think they finally had the upper hand. They were speeding blindly toward their own destruction, walking right into a trap that I had designed perfectly. I left the diner and walked 3 blocks to a small community park on the south side. Maya had sent one of her security men ahead of time to ensure the perimeter was clear. I walked slowly, dragging my scuffed loafers against the concrete, perfectly playing the part of a lost, broken man. I found a weathered wooden bench near the edge of a small pond. The cold Chicago breeze bit through the thin fabric of my moth-eaten cardigan, but I ignored it. The dull, throbbing pain in my cracked ribs was a constant reminder of why I was sitting there. I stared blankly at the ducks gliding across the murky water. I let my shoulders slump. I let my jaw go slack. I erased 40 years of ruthless business acumen from my eyes and replaced it with a hollow, vacant stare. I was no longer Isaiah the millionaire auto magnate. I was just a confused old man waiting to be found. I did not have to wait long. The screech of tires echoed down the street. Tasha leased sedan swerved aggressively to the curb, parking half on the grass. The doors flew open. Jamal and Tasha scrambled out, their faces pale and frantic. They looked around wildly until Jamal spotted me sitting on the bench. He pointed a shaking finger in my direction. Tasha let out a gasp of sheer relief. They thought they had just found their golden goose. They thought they had just saved their own lives. They practically ran across the park grass. I did not turn my head. I kept my eyes fixed on the pond, muttering nonsense under my breath. I played the part flawlessly. Jamal reached me first. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask about the blood on my forehead or the fact that I was shivering in the cold. He simply grabbed my upper arm with a rough, violent jerk. The sudden movement sent a spike of white-hot agony through my broken ribs, but I forced myself to remain limp and unresponsive. "Come on, old man," Jamal barked, his grip tightening like a vice. "You are coming home right now." I blinked slowly, turning my head to look at him with empty eyes. "Who are you?" I mumbled, my voice weak and shaky. "Where is Vivian? I need to find Vivian." Vivian had been dead for 10 years. Hearing her name come out of my mouth in that pathetic tone made Jamal roll his eyes in deep disgust. He looked at Tasha, nodding toward the street. "He has lost his mind completely," Jamal whispered harshly. "He does not even know where he is. This is perfect for the medical affidavit." "Grab his other arm." Tasha stepped forward. She did not want to touch me. She grabbed the sleeve of my dirty cardigan with 2 fingers, pulling me up from the wooden bench. "Get up, Isaiah," she hissed. "We do not have time for this nonsense. The buyers are waiting." They dragged me toward the street. They shoved me into the back seat of the sedan without a shred of dignity. Jamal climbed in next to me, pressing me against the door, while Tasha sat in the driver's seat. She slammed her foot on the gas, speeding away from the park. The ride back to my estate was suffocating. I sat slumped against the cold window, staring blankly at the passing streets. Inside, my mind was racing. I was analyzing every single move they made. Jamal leaned forward, whispering frantically to Tasha over the center console. "We have the document ready," he muttered. "The lawyer drafted the emergency power of attorney and the property transfer deed this morning. All we need is his signature." "What if he refuses?" Tasha whispered back, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What if he causes a scene?" Jamal looked at me with a cold, dead expression. "He will not refuse. We will make sure of it." They pulled through the massive iron gates of my property. The estate looked beautiful in the afternoon light, a towering monument of brick and glass that I had built with my own sweat. But today it was a prison. They pulled me out of the vehicle the moment it stopped in the circular driveway. Jamal did not wait for me to find my footing. He dragged me up the marble steps, his fingers digging painfully into my injured shoulder. We stepped into the grand foyer. Jamal slammed the heavy oak front door shut behind us. I heard the distinct metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. The finality of that sound echoed through the high ceilings. I was locked inside my own home with two desperate criminals. "Move!" Jamal commanded, shoving me roughly toward the kitchen. I stumbled forward, dragging my feet, letting my knees buckle slightly. I leaned heavily against the polished granite island in the center of the kitchen, panting as if the short walk had completely exhausted me. I let my head drop, staring at the floor, playing the role of a man whose spirit had been entirely broken. Tasha marched over to the dining table. She grabbed a thick manila folder and marched back, throwing it aggressively onto the granite island, right in front of me. Two crisp, legally binding documents slid out of the folder. An emergency power of attorney granting Jamal absolute control over my medical and financial decisions, and a property transfer deed surrendering my entire Chicago auto estate directly to them. Jamal pulled a heavy silver fountain pen from his suit pocket. He slammed it down on top of the documents. The sharp clack of the metal against the stone made me flinch intentionally. "Sign the papers, Dad," Jamal ordered, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and rage. "We are done playing games. You are going to sign these papers right now, and then you are going to go upstairs and stay in your room until the buyers leave." I looked up at him, slowly keeping my eyes vacant. I reached out with a shaking hand, hovering my fingers over the silver pen, but I did not pick it up. I let out a confused whimper. "I do not understand," I whispered weakly. "I need to wait for Vivian. I cannot sign anything without Vivian." Jamal slammed his fist down on the granite counter. "Stop talking about Mom," he yelled, losing the last shred of his composure. "She is dead. She has been dead for a decade. You are senile. You are sick. You owe me this house. I deserve this house. Sign the damn paper." I slowly pulled my hand back, shaking my head left and right, acting terrified. "No," I mumbled. "No, I wanna go outside." That was the breaking point. Tasha had reached the absolute limit of her patience. The country club humiliation, the frozen credit cards, the looming threat of Dante Vance breaking her legs, it all boiled over in a single terrifying instant. She lunged forward, grabbing the collar of my moth-eaten cardigan. She yanked me toward her, her face inches from mine. The mask of the sophisticated, wealthy suburban wife was completely gone. Her eyes were wide, manic, and completely devoid of any human empathy. She looked like a cornered predator ready to tear its prey apart to survive. She picked up the silver fountain pen and shoved it violently into my trembling hand, wrapping her cold, manicured fingers around mine to force my grip. "Sign it, Isaiah," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous guttural whisper that sent a genuine chill through the room. Her face was twisted in pure malice. I kept my eyes wide, playing the terrified victim. She leaned in even closer, her breath hot against my face. "Sign it," she repeated, her words dripping with absolute hatred. "Sign it right now, or we will drag you over to that door, and we will throw you right back down those basement stairs. And this time, I swear to God, I will walk down there myself and make sure your neck snaps." The threat hung heavy in the air, a vile, murderous promise. Jamal stood right behind her, his silence acting as total agreement. He was fully prepared to let his wife murder his own father if it meant paying off his debts. They thought they had me completely cornered. They thought I was a terrified, senile old man who would do whatever it took to avoid another brutal fall into the dark. They thought that intimidation and violence were the ultimate tools of control. They were absolutely wrong. I kept my hands shaking. I kept the tears pooling in my eyes. I looked at the property transfer deed, letting out a pathetic, defeated sob. But deep down behind the vacant stare and the trembling hands, I was not broken. I was calculating. The trap was set. The bait was taken. They had dragged me exactly where I needed to be. And they had just given me all the legal leverage I needed to destroy them permanently. I slowly lowered the pen toward the signature line, preparing to give them exactly what they wanted. A signature, just not the one they were expecting. The cold granite of the kitchen island pressed against my palms. I let my hands shake violently, knocking the heavy silver fountain pen against the polished stone. The clatter echoed in the vast, silent kitchen. I let out another loud, pathetic sob, allowing my whole body to shudder. Through my blurry, tear-filled eyes, I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the property transfer deed and the emergency power of attorney. For 40 years, my signature had been my bond. In the auto business, a man's name on a contract means everything. My real signature was bold, sharp, and commanding. It was a signature recognized by every major bank and title company in Chicago. But the signature I was about to give them was something entirely different. I let the tip of the fountain pen touch the paper. Tasha released her grip just enough for me to move my hand. I exaggerated the tremor in my fingers, making my wrist jerk and spasm. I pressed too hard, then too light, letting the black ink blot and smear across the pristine white page. I dragged the pen in erratic, jagged loops that vaguely resembled the letters of my name but were completely disjointed. It looked exactly like the desperate, uncontrolled scrawl of an elderly patient suffering from severe advanced dementia. It was a catastrophic mess of ink. Any licensed notary public, any title lawyer, any bank manager with half a brain would take one look at that document and immediately reject it. It would never pass a basic legal check. It was entirely beautifully worthless. But Jamal and Tasha were too blinded by their own greed and panic to see the truth. They were suffocating under the weight of their debt to the syndicate, and they just needed a piece of paper to present to the buyers to make their problems disappear. I finished the hideous scrawl on the deed and then dragged the pen across the power of attorney document, making the second signature look even worse than the first. I let the pen slip from my fingers and clatter onto the granite counter. I slumped forward, burying my face in my hands, weeping loudly like a man who had just lost his entire world. Tasha did not waste a single second. She lunged across the island and snatched the papers out from under me. She held the documents up to the light, her eyes wide with a manic, obsessive triumph. A wicked, arrogant smile spread across her pale face. Finally, she breathed out, her voice dripping with sheer malice. "Finally, we own this place. We own everything." Jamal let out a massive sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his brow. He looked at the forged signatures and chuckled a dark, heartless sound. "Look at this mess," he muttered, shaking his head. "The old man really is losing his mind. Dante Vance will take one look at this and the medical affidavit and hand us the money. We are safe, Tasha. We are going to be completely safe from the mob. Tasha carefully folded the documents and placed them inside a thick leather portfolio. Now what do we do with him? She asked, pointing at me with absolute disdain, as if I were a piece of garbage left on the floor. Jamal grabbed me by the arm, hauling me upright. The sharp pain in my cracked ribs flared hot and bright, but I kept my body limp and cooperative. We lock him upstairs, Jamal said, dragging me toward the grand staircase. We put him in the guest bedroom. We make sure he cannot wander off again until the buyers leave tomorrow. Come on, you crazy old fool, you are going to your room. They dragged me up the long, curving staircase. I stumbled on purpose, dragging my feet, making myself as heavy as possible to sell the illusion of total physical and mental defeat. Jamal cursed under his breath, sweating heavily as he pulled my dead weight down the hallway. They shoved me roughly into the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. I stumbled forward, falling onto the carpeted floor. Tasha stood in the doorway, looking down at me with supreme satisfaction. "Stay in there, Isaiah," she ordered, "and do not make a sound." Jamal was not taking any chances. He walked over to the large windows that overlooked the backyard. He pulled a hammer and a handful of long steel nails from his pocket. I lay on the floor, weeping softly as I watched my son drive the thick nails directly into the expensive wooden window frame, sealing them completely shut. The loud banging echoed in the room, a final definitive statement of his betrayal. He was boarding me up in my own home, treating me like a prisoner of war. He thought the nails would keep me contained. He forgot that I built this house. I knew every structural weakness, every emergency exit, and every blind spot. He was locking a master builder inside a room made of wood. When he was finished, he tossed the hammer onto a chair and walked out. The heavy door slammed shut. I heard the lock click into place. I heard their footsteps fading down the hallway as they ran off to celebrate their fake victory. The heavy silence of the large house settled around me. I waited 10 seconds, then 20. I listened carefully for any sound of them returning. Nothing. As soon as the silence was absolute, the terrified, weeping old man vanished. I stopped crying instantly. My face turned to stone. I slowly pushed myself up from the carpeted floor. I stood up straight, towering in the quiet room. I rolled my shoulders back, letting out a long, controlled breath, carefully stretching my healing ribs. The pain was still there, but it was nothing compared to the cold, focused fury burning in my veins. I reached into the inner pocket of my scuffed cardigan and pulled out the small black burner phone. I flipped it open, the dim screen illuminating my face in the dark bedroom. I pressed the speed dial button. The line connected immediately. "Maya," I said, my voice deep, steady, and completely devoid of any weakness. "They took the bait. They have the forged deed." I stood in the locked guest bedroom of my own estate with the burner phone pressed firmly against my ear. Maya confirmed the receipt of my message. Through the hidden cameras I had meticulously installed weeks ago, Maya and her private security team were monitoring every single move Jamal and Tasha made downstairs. I did not need to look at a screen to know exactly what my son was doing. He was a desperate man, and desperate men always follow the path of least resistance. Down in the grand living room, Jamal was pacing the imported hardwood floor, his hands shaking violently as he gripped his cell phone. Tasha sat on the edge of the expensive leather sofa, biting her manicured nails, her eyes wide and fixed on him. Jamal dialed a number. The audio feed piped directly to Maya's secure server captured the long, agonizing ringing. Then the rough, gravelly voice of Dante Vance echoed through the room. Jamal did not waste time with pleasantries. He was suffocating under the weight of the Friday midnight deadline. He told the mob boss that he had the ultimate solution to their $200,000 problem. He said he had something much better than a simple cash repayment. He offered the syndicate leader my entire custom-built Chicago auto estate. Jamal's voice cracked with panic as he made the pitch. He told the violent criminal that he held the sole emergency power of attorney and a freshly signed property transfer deed. He offered to sell the entire property, a commercial masterpiece, for a mere fraction of its actual worth. He asked for $500,000 in pure, untraceable cash. I could hear the heavy, dangerous silence on the other end of the line. Dante Vance was a brutal, violent man who broke legs for a living, but he was also a shrewd businessman who understood the distinct smell of desperate blood. A massive auto estate for $500,000 in cold cash was the kind of massive profit margin that organized crime syndicates dreamed about. Jamal laid out the math with frantic urgency, begging for his life. The $500,000 would wipe out Tasha's gambling debt completely, leaving Jamal and Tasha with $300,000 in cash to walk away and start over. Dante let out a low, greedy laugh that made my blood run cold. He agreed to the terms immediately. He told Jamal that he and his men would arrive at my estate the very next day at high noon. They would bring the cash in a heavy briefcase, and they would conduct a private off-the-books closing right there in my living room. Jamal hung up the phone and collapsed onto the sofa next to Tasha, sobbing with pure, unadulterated relief. They hugged each other tightly, convinced that they had just executed the perfect crime. I sat on the edge of the bed in the locked guest room, listening to the muffled sounds of their sick celebration downstairs. Soon their relief morphed into a manic, toxic energy. They ran up the grand staircase to the master suite and began pulling expensive designer suitcases from the walk-in closets. Through the audio feed, I listened to them meticulously plan their escape. They were going to take the $300,000 in cash drive straight to the airport and board a one-way flight to Europe. But the most chilling part of their conversation was not their glamorous escape plan. It was what they planned to do with me. Tasha asked Jamal what they were going to do about the old man locked in the guest room down the hall. Jamal did not hesitate for a single second. His voice was completely devoid of a soul. He told her they were going to do absolutely nothing. They were going to leave the heavy doors locked. They were going to leave the windows nailed shut. They were going to take their luggage walk out the front door and never look back. He calculated out loud that without food or water, an older man with broken ribs would not last more than a few days. They were going to leave me to die of dehydration in my own home. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, icy calm. I stood up and walked over to the large windows Jamal had so arrogantly nailed shut. I knew exactly where the structural weak points were. I knew exactly how to dismantle the locking mechanism from the inside without making a single sound. I reached into the lining of my scuffed cardigan and pulled out a small, flat titanium pry bar that Maya's extraction team had slipped into my pocket. I wedged the cool metal between the wood and the sill, applying slow, steady pressure. The nails groaned softly, yielding to the leverage. I worked in complete silence, removing the nails one by one, placing them carefully on the soft carpet. Down the hall in the master bedroom, the frantic packing suddenly stopped. Tasha zipped up a heavy suitcase and paused. The house was quiet, far too quiet. Then I intentionally let one of the heavy steel nails slip from my fingers. It hit the hardwood floor near the door with a sharp metallic clink. The sound echoed down the long corridor like a gunshot. Jamal froze. He told Tasha to stay put. He walked out of the master suite, his footsteps heavy and hesitant as he approached the guest bedroom. He turned the key in the lock and shoved the heavy door open, expecting to see me curled up on the floor. He stepped into the room, his breath catching in his throat. The heavy wooden door was wide open. The steel nails that had sealed the windows were lying in a neat little pile on the rug. The window was wide open, the cool evening breeze blowing the curtains into the room. Jamal stared at the empty space, his heart plummeting into his stomach. The room was completely empty. I had vanished into thin air, and their perfect plan had just turned into an absolute nightmare. The sun rose over Chicago like a slow-burning fire. I sat in the secure penthouse suite overlooking the city skyline. I watched the live tracking data on the tablet in my hands. Jamal and Tasha had not slept a single second. For the past 10 hours, they had been driving frantically through the dark streets of the South Side. They shined their high-powered flashlights down narrow alleyways. They checked behind dumpsters. They walked through the damp grass of the local parks, looking for a bleeding old man. They searched everywhere for the ghost they thought they had created, but they found absolutely nothing. The panic was eating them alive from the inside out. Their entire plan relied on having my body or my total compliance. Now they had neither. They could not call the police. If they filed a missing person report, the authorities would search my estate. The detectives would easily find the heavy bloodstains that had seeped deep into the concrete of the basement floor. They would see the Pride window. They would ask questions that Jamal and Tasha could not answer without incriminating themselves for attempted murder. They were completely out of options, and they were completely out of time. It was Friday morning. The deadline established by the violent syndicate was noon. They drove back to my estate in absolute silence. I watched the high-definition camera feed as they walked through the front door. Tasha looked like a walking corpse. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained with sweat. Jamal was hyperventilating, grabbing his own hair as he paced across the marble floor of the grand foyer. They had to proceed with the open house. They had to meet the mob buyers face to face. They had to try and sell my Auto Empire property using a forged deed with an illegible signature. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only mission they had left. Exactly at high noon, the heavy iron security gates at the front of my property swung open. Jamal had disabled the keypad to allow the buyers inside. 3 matte black sport utility vehicles rolled up the long circular driveway. The heavy tires crunched aggressively against the gravel. They parked in a diagonal formation blocking the entire entrance to the estate. 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They did not wear the tailored suits of corporate real estate investors. They wore cheap, dark jackets over thick necks. They had the cold, dead eyes of men who broke bones for a living. Then Dante Vance stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a massive man with a scarred face and a ruthless reputation. He held a heavy aluminum briefcase in his right hand. Inside that briefcase was $300,000 in untraceable cash and the official debt forgiveness documents Tasha desperately needed to keep her legs from being crushed with a baseball bat. Dante did not knock. He walked up the marble steps and pushed the heavy oak front doors open, stepping right into my home. Jamal and Tasha were standing in the grand foyer, frozen in fear. They looked like 2 deer trapped in the headlights of an oncoming truck. Dante walked right past them without saying a word. He stepped into my massive living room and looked around. His greedy eyes took in the vaulted ceilings, the custom crystal chandeliers, and the imported hardwood floors. He walked over to the stone fireplace and ran his hand along the mantel. He calculated the massive profit he was about to make. He let out a harsh, grating laugh. He looked at Jamal and mocked him. He told my son that he had excellent taste in real estate. He laughed at the pathetic boy who was selling his father's empire for pennies on the dollar just to save his own miserable life. Dante walked over to the massive granite island in the center of my kitchen. He dropped the heavy aluminum briefcase onto the stone surface. He snapped the metal latches open. Stacks of crisp $100 bills were neatly arranged inside. Tasha let out a pathetic, desperate gasp. She took a step forward, reaching her shaking hand toward the money. One of Dante's thugs immediately stepped in front of her, crossing his massive arms and blocking her path. Dante smirked. He told them the cash was theirs to take. He told Tasha that her gambling debt would be wiped completely clean and she could walk away a free woman. But first he needed to finalize the paperwork. He snapped his fingers loudly. A thin, nervous man wearing wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward from the group of thugs. It was Dante, mob lawyer. The man carried his own worn leather briefcase filled with dirty notary stamps and fraudulent closing documents. Dante leaned heavily against the granite counter. He crossed his arms and stared a hole straight through my son. He asked a very simple, very dangerous question. "Where is the old man?" he demanded. "I need to see him right now. I need his physical identification card to make this transaction legal. We are washing a massive commercial property, Jamal. I'm not handing over $500,000 in value without making sure the previous owner is not going to suddenly walk into a police station tomorrow morning and report a stolen house." Jamal swallowed hard. I watched his throat bob on the high-resolution camera feed. He lied through his teeth with the desperation of a man begging for his life. He told the violent mob boss that his father had suffered a complete mental collapse during the night. He claimed that I became violently unpredictable and unmanageable. He lied and said that he and Tasha had to forcibly commit me to a highly specialized lockdown psychiatric care facility on the other side of the state. He swore that I was heavily sedated and permanently locked inside a padded room where I would never see the light of day again. Jamal reached into his leather portfolio with trembling hands. He pulled out the fraudulent medical affidavit signed by the corrupt psychiatrist they had bribed the day before. He placed it on the granite counter. Then he pulled out the emergency power of attorney and the property transfer deed. He pushed the documents across the island toward the mob lawyer. Jamal begged Dante to just look at the doctor's signature and the official state seals. He insisted that he possessed the sole absolute legal authority over the estate. He promised the criminal syndicate that Isaiah was a ghost and the property was totally clear for the taking. The room fell completely silent. The heavy tension in the air was suffocating. Tasha held her breath, gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. The mob lawyer stepped up to the island and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He picked up the medical affidavit and read through the false diagnosis. He nodded slowly, accepting the lie about my severe dementia. Then he put the affidavit down and picked up the property transfer deed. He stared at the signature line at the bottom of the page. He stared closely at the chaotic, jagged loops of black ink I had deliberately dragged across the paper. I had made sure it looked like the desperate, uncontrolled scrawl of a madman. It did not match the printed name below it. It did not look like a legally binding signature. It looked like a catastrophic mess. The lawyer frowned, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He leaned closer to the document, inspecting the ink. He shook his head and looked up at Dante. He told his boss that something was very wrong. The signature was a complete disaster. He stated that no legitimate county clerk would ever accept this transfer without asking serious questions. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy metal notary stamp. He hovered the stamp over the fraudulent deed, hesitating. He told Jamal that washing this specific paperwork was extremely risky and could expose the syndicate to a federal investigation. Tasha completely lost her mind. She burst into loud, hysterical tears. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the lawyer's sleeve. She begged him to just stamp the paper. She swore on her life that the old man was gone forever and would never come back. She promised them that nobody in the entire world was ever going to contest the sale of the house. She screamed that they had done everything Dante asked and they just needed the money to leave the country. The lawyer looked at Dante. The mob boss gave a slow, indifferent nod, signaling the lawyer to proceed with the risk. The lawyer sighed. He gripped the heavy metal notary stamp in his right hand. He raised it high into the air, preparing to slam it down onto the fraudulent deed and legitimize the theft of my entire life's work. Just as the metal stamp began its descent toward the paper, a massive sound echoed through the grand foyer. It was not the sound of a police siren. It was the loud, unmistakable sound of the heavy oak front doors swinging wide open. The massive brass hinges groaned loudly, shattering the tense silence of the living room. The heavy footsteps of a man walking with absolute authority echoed against the imported tile. Every single head in the kitchen snapped toward the entrance. The stamp froze in midair. The open house was about to receive its final guest. The heavy oak doors of my estate did not just open. They swung wide with the unstoppable force of a reckoning. The heavy brass hinges groaned a sound that I had heard 1,000 times when I built this place from the dirt up. But today that sound was a death knell for the traitors standing inside my kitchen. I stepped over the threshold and my polished leather shoes struck the imported tile of the grand foyer. I was no longer the broken, weeping old man they had dragged out of a public park. I was not wearing mismatched, moth-eaten clothes. I was not wearing a scuffed, dirty cardigan. I was wearing a pristine, custom-tailored charcoal suit that fit my frame with absolute perfection. I stood tall, my spine straight, completely ignoring the dull ache in my healing ribs. In my right hand, I held a solid silver-handled cane, not as a crutch for a weak man, but as a symbol of absolute authority. The sunlight poured in through the open doorway behind me, casting my long shadow directly across the floor and stretching all the way into the living room where my enemies stood frozen. I did not come alone. Maya stepped through the doorway right beside me. She wore a razor-sharp navy blue designer suit, her posture radiating pure, unadulterated legal violence. She held a thick black leather folder in her hands containing the digital and physical evidence that would bury everyone in that room. Flanking us on either side were two massive, heavily armed private security contractors. They were not rented guards. They were former military professionals wearing dark tactical gear, their faces completely void of any emotion. They stepped into the foyer and spread out instantly, securing the perimeter and blocking the only exit. The silence in the kitchen was absolute and deafening. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a massive explosion. Jamal stood by the granite island, his hand still hovering in the air where he had been gesturing to the mob lawyer. I watched the blood completely drain from his face in a matter of milliseconds. He went ghost white. His skin took on the sickly pale hue of a dead man. His eyes bulged out of his head, staring at me as if I had just crawled out of a grave. He stopped breathing. He simply could not process the visual information his eyes were sending to his brain. He had pushed me down the stairs. He had locked me in the dark. He had nailed my windows shut. He had paid $10,000 to a corrupt doctor to declare me a vegetable. Yet here I was standing in my own house, commanding the room like a king returning to his throne. Tasha was holding a crystal champagne glass she had poured to celebrate the sale of my life's work. When her eyes met mine, her fingers went immediately numb. The glass slipped from her manicured hand. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. The sharp crash of the crystal breaking was the only sound in the entire house. The expensive champagne splashed across her designer shoes, but she did not even flinch. Her mouth hung open. Her arrogant, entitled facade collapsed, instantly replaced by sheer, primal terror. She knew in that exact moment that the game was entirely over. The violent mob boss, Dante Vance, slowly turned his massive frame around to face the foyer. His thugs instinctively reached inside their dark jackets, but my private security contractors immediately shifted their stance, their hands resting on their own holstered weapons. The tactical advantage belonged to me. Dante narrowed his scarred eyes, analyzing the sudden shift in power. He looked at my tailored suit, my silver cane, and the heavy security presence. He was a predator, and he immediately recognized that he had just walked into another predator's territory. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The silver tip of my cane tapped rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Tap, tap, tap. Each step echoed through the massive living room, a countdown to their absolute destruction. I looked directly at the son I had raised, the boy I had given everything, to the man who had traded his soul for a quick payday. "Jamal," I said. My voice was deep, resonant, and booming through the massive house I had built with my own 2 hands. It was not the weak, trembling whisper of a senile old man asking for his late wife. It was the voice of the man who owned every single brick in this building. "Jamal, are you giving a tour of my property to strangers without my permission?" Jamal stumbled backward. His back hit the granite island. He bumped into the heavy aluminum briefcase filled with the $300,000 he thought was his salvation. He tried to speak, but his vocal cords refused to work. He opened and closed his mouth, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto dry land. Dante glared at Jamal, the muscles in his thick neck bulging with sudden explosive rage. The mob boss realized instantly that he had been played. He realized that the frantic, sweating man next to him had just tried to hustle a violent criminal syndicate. Dante took a threatening step toward Jamal, completely ignoring the fact that my security contractors were watching his every move. "You told me he was a vegetable in a nursing home." Dante barked, his rough voice dripping with lethal malice. "You told me he was locked in a padded room with advanced dementia. You told me he did not even know his own name. What is this, Jamal? Who the hell is standing in that hallway?" The mob lawyer quickly pulled his heavy metal notary stamp away from the fraudulent property transfer deed. He shoved the stamp back into his leather briefcase, desperate to distance himself from the toxic, illegal paperwork on the counter. The criminal syndicate wanted nothing to do with a real estate transaction when the actual owner was standing 10 feet away with a corporate attorney and an armed tactical squad. Tasha began to sob uncontrollably. It was not a fake, manipulative cry. It was the raw, ugly weeping of a woman who knew she was about to lose everything, including her freedom and potentially her life. She backed away from the granite island, pressing herself into the corner of the kitchen, trying to make herself as small as possible. She looked at me, pleading with her eyes, but she found absolutely zero mercy in my gaze. I had warned her. I had told her not to speak to me in my own house. She had chosen to ignore that warning. Jamal finally found his voice, but it was pathetic. He pointed a trembling, sweaty finger at me desperately, trying to salvage the burning wreckage of his fraudulent narrative. He looked at Dante, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "He is crazy," Jamal stammered frantically, grabbing the forged medical affidavit from the counter and waving it in the air. "I swear to you, he is crazy. He is legally incompetent. He wandered away from the facility. Look at the doctor's signature. I have the paperwork. I have the emergency power of attorney. I am the only one who can make decisions for this estate. He does not know what he is saying." It was the most pathetic display of cowardice I had ever witnessed in my entire 75 years on this earth. My own son, caught dead to rights, was still trying to peddle his pathetic lies while staring the truth right in the face. He thought that waving a fraudulent piece of paper could somehow erase the reality standing right in front of him. He was clinging to the fake legal document as if it were a life preserver in the middle of a hurricane. Maya let out a short, cold laugh. It was a sharp sound that cut through Jamal's hysterical screaming. She stepped forward, standing right beside me. She did not look at Jamal. She looked directly at Dante Vance and his mob lawyer. I stood perfectly still, resting both of my hands on the silver handle of my cane. I let Jamal scream. I let him wave the forged papers. I let him dig his grave a little bit deeper. He was so desperate to convince the violent criminals that he was in control, he completely failed to realize that the trap had already slammed shut. He was yelling about a power of attorney that was about to become his direct ticket to a federal penitentiary. The resurrection was complete. The ghost of Isaiah was officially back from the dead, and I brought hell right along with me. The echo of Jamal screaming about his fake medical papers hung in the heavy air of the grand foyer. He was sweating profusely, waving the fraudulent power of attorney like a desperate man waving a white flag in a war zone. He truly believed that a forged piece of paper could protect him from the reality standing right in front of his eyes. He thought he could just shout his lies loud enough to make them true, but the men standing in my kitchen were not fools. Dante Vance was a violent criminal, but he was not an idiot. He looked at Jamal, then looked at me, and he knew instantly who held the real power in the room. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to shout. I simply leaned on my silver-handled cane and nodded to Maya. Maya stepped forward. Her high heels clicked with rhythmic, terrifying precision against the imported tile floor. She walked right past Jamal as if he were nothing more than a stain on the rug. She approached the massive granite island in the center of the kitchen, stopping right in front of Dante and his mob lawyer. She held a thick black leather folder in her hands. With a sharp, deliberate motion, she slapped the folder down onto the marble surface. The loud smack made Jamal jump backward. "That power of attorney is a complete forgery," Maya stated. Her voice was ice cold, carrying the lethal authority of a corporate attorney who destroys lives for a living. She looked directly at the mob lawyer, her eyes narrowing with predatory focus. It was signed under extreme physical duress while my client was held hostage in his own home. Furthermore, the signature on that document does not even remotely match Mr. Sterling's official state identification. Jamal started to stammer, shaking his head frantically. "No, that is a lie. He signed it willingly." "You saw the medical affidavit. The doctor said he is incompetent. The doctor certified it." Maya did not even look at him. She opened her black folder and pulled out a stack of high-definition color photographs. She spread them across the granite island for the mob lawyer to see. They were crystal-clear images pulled directly from the hidden cameras I had installed in the dining room. They showed Jamal handing a thick envelope of cash to the corrupt psychiatrist. They showed the doctor filling out the blank medical forms without me ever being in the room. The medical affidavit is a felony fraud. Maya continued, her voice echoing through the silent house. "We have complete high-definition video and crisp audio of Jamal Sterling bribing a licensed medical professional with $10,000 in cash. We also have footage of him and his wife locking my client in an upstairs bedroom and nailing the windows shut. The documents you are holding are entirely worthless. If you attempt to process that deed, you will be participating in an aggravated elder abuse conspiracy and federal wire fraud." The mob lawyer turned completely pale. He was a man who handled dirty money and shady real estate deals, but he knew exactly where the line was drawn. A domestic dispute over a house was one thing. A federal investigation involving kidnapping, medical fraud, and elder abuse was something else entirely. He dropped Jamal forged papers onto the counter as if they were covered in poison. He took 3 massive steps backward, physically distancing himself from my son. He looked at Dante and shook his head rapidly, silently, confirming that the deal was completely dead. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. The $300,000 in the aluminum briefcase was suddenly light years away from Jamal and Tasha. The money they needed to save their lives was being pulled right off the table. Tasha completely lost whatever small fraction of her mind she had left. The panic and the impending reality of the violent syndicate breaking her legs finally shattered her. She lunged forward, slamming her hands down on the granite counter. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at me with a mixture of sheer terror and unbelievable entitlement. "We are his family!" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with hysteria. "We are his blood. He owes us. We have rights to this house. We have rights to this money. We have taken care of him. We deserve to sell this property to pay our debts." I looked at the woman my son had chosen to marry. I looked at the woman who had stood at the top of my basement stairs and told her husband to let me rot in the dark. She was the absolute embodiment of unearned arrogance. She genuinely believed that marrying into my family gave her a divine right to steal 40 years of my blood, sweat, and tears. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The heavy thud of my cane against the floor silenced her screaming. I stood tall, towering over her trembling frame. I looked down at her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "You have rights to nothing," I said. My voice was low, vibrating with a deep, uncompromising finality. "You have no rights to my money. You have no rights to my legacy. And you certainly have no rights to this house." Jamal wiped his sweating forehead, stepping closer to his wife. His chest was heaving. He looked at me completely bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "What do you mean we have no rights to the house? You are the sole owner. Your name is on the deed. When you die or when you are declared incompetent, the house transfers to me. I am your only son. It is the law." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, calculating smile of a master chess player who had just trapped the opponent king. "You are talking about a house that does not belong to me," I replied softly, letting the words hang in the heavy air of the kitchen. Jamal blinked. His eyes darted around the massive commercial auto estate property, the vaulted ceilings, the imported chandeliers, the custom stone fireplace. He could not comprehend what I was saying. "What do you mean it does not belong to you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You built this place. You paid for it. It is your house." Maya reached into her black leather folder one last time. She pulled out a pristine, heavily embossed legal document. It was not a forgery. It was a certified, fully recorded property deed bearing the official seal of the county clerk. She bypassed Jamal completely and handed the authentic document directly to Dante Vance's mob lawyer. The lawyer adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began to read the dense legal text. As his eyes scanned down the page, his jaw slowly dropped. He looked up at me in absolute shock, and then he looked at his boss, Dante. I leaned my weight onto my silver-handled cane and looked directly at the violent mob boss and my pathetic son. I transferred the absolute deed to this estate to the Chicago Black Historical Conservancy. Exactly 6 months ago, I announced, my voice cutting through the room with surgical precision. "I only hold a life estate on the premises, which grants me the legal right to reside here until the day I die. After that, the property automatically reverts to the foundation to be used as a museum and community center." Jamal staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. He grabbed the edge of the granite island to keep himself from collapsing. I continued, locking my eyes with Dante to make sure the criminal understood the massive, unforgivable mistake my son had just led him into. "The organization I donated this house to is a heavily guarded federal nonprofit," I explained slowly, letting every single word sink into their brains. "Their assets are monitored and protected by state and federal authorities. They are heavily audited by the government." I pointed my silver cane directly at Jamal's chest. "Your brilliant plan to save your own life was to try and sell federal nonprofit property to an organized crime syndicate," I said, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You forced me to sign a fake deed thinking you were stealing from an old defenseless man. But what you actually did was attempt to defraud the federal government and a violent mob boss at the exact same time." The silence that washed over the room was apocalyptic. The reality of the situation crashed down on everyone present. The mob lawyer shoved the real deed back across the counter and took another massive step away from Jamal. He looked at Dante, his face completely pale with fear. "Boss," the lawyer whispered urgently, "we have to leave right now. If we touch this transaction, if we give them a single dollar for this property, we will have the Federal Bureau of Investigation breathing down our necks before the sun goes down. This house is a radioactive trap." Tasha let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She finally realized the absolute totality of their defeat. They had no money, They had no house. They had no legal authority. The fake medical documents were worthless. The forged deed was worthless. The entire foundation of their grand escape plan had just been evaporated into thin air by a single perfectly executed legal maneuver. Jamal looked at the briefcase full of $300,000 sitting on the kitchen island. It was right there. It was so close he could touch it, but it was suddenly surrounded by an invisible, impenetrable wall of federal law and criminal rage. He slowly lifted his eyes from the money and looked at Dante. The massive mob boss slowly closed the aluminum briefcase. The metallic snap of the latches locking into place sounded like a coffin sealing shut. Dante did not look angry anymore. He looked entirely devoid of mercy. He looked at Jamal not as a business partner, but as a dead man walking. Jamal had just tried to hustle a ruthless criminal syndicate out of $500,000 by selling them a government-protected museum. He had promised them a clean, easy real estate wash, and instead he had nearly dragged their entire underground operation into the spotlight of a massive federal fraud investigation. I stood perfectly still, watching the color completely vanish from my son's face. I watched the absolute terror take over his body. I had stripped him of every single weapon he had. I had taken his money. I had taken his leverage. I had taken his house. I had completely exposed his lies. Now he was standing entirely defenseless in a room with men who killed people for a living. I did not have to raise a hand to punish him. I simply had to reveal the truth and let his own greed become his executioner. The legal slaughter was fully complete and the wolves were finally circling the prey. The silence in my kitchen was so profound and absolute that I could hear the expensive ticking of the designer watch on Jamal's wrist. The mob lawyer stood frozen, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping slightly down the bridge of his sweating nose. He had just read the certified legal deed provided by Maya. He had just realized that the commercial estate he was about to illegally transfer was strictly owned by a heavily guarded federal nonprofit organization. He was a criminal attorney, a man who navigated the dark gray areas of the law every single day. But he knew that touching a government-protected property was professional suicide. It was the kind of colossal mistake that brings down entire criminal syndicates and puts men in federal maximum security prisons for the rest of their natural lives. The lawyer slowly turned his head toward his boss. Dante Vance was a massive, imposing figure, a man who radiated brutal, unforgiving street violence. He had come to my home expecting a clean, simple transaction. He expected to hand over a briefcase of cash, wipe a gambling debt clean, and walk away with a luxury estate worth 5 times his investment. He did not expect to be handed a radioactive legal trap. The lawyer leaned in close to Dante. He raised his hand to shield his mouth, but the sheer panic radiating from his body language was visible to everyone in the room. He whispered frantically into the mob boss' ear. I watched Dante face as the information was processed. It was a terrifying transformation. The arrogant, greedy smirk completely vanished from his scarred face. His thick jaw clenched so tightly that I could see the muscles bulging beneath his skin. The color of his face changed, darkening from a pale complexion to a deep, explosive shade of purple. The veins in his thick neck stood out like thick cords. He was not just angry, he was deeply, profoundly insulted. Jamal had not just tried to hustle him. Jamal had tried to make a complete fool out of him. My son had looked a violent, ruthless crime boss dead in the eye and tried to sell him a worthless, forged piece of paper that would have triggered a massive federal investigation the moment it was filed. In the criminal underworld, disrespect is a far worse offense than an unpaid debt. Jamal had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Jamal stood by the granite island, his entire body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate a sentence, trying to spin another pathetic lie to save his miserable life. He raised his hands in a weak, defensive gesture. Dante, please listen to me. Jamal stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. I can explain. The old man is lying. My father is trying to trick us. I have the medical paperwork. I have the power of attorney. We can still make this deal work. I promise you I can fix this. Dante did not say a single word. He did not argue. He did not ask for clarification. He simply looked down at the heavy aluminum briefcase sitting open on my pristine granite counter. The $300,000 in crisp, untraceable bills sat there completely untouched. Dante reached out with his massive, calloused hands and grabbed the lid of the briefcase. He slammed it shut. The loud, sharp crack of the metal latches snapping into place echoed through the massive kitchen like a gunshot. It was the sound of a death sentence being handed down. The money was officially off the table. The deal was permanently dead. Tasha let out a sharp, terrified gasp. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the imported tile. She pressed her back against the custom cabinetry, her hands flying to her mouth. She knew exactly what the closing of that briefcase meant. She knew that the grace period was over and the violent consequences of her massive gambling debt had just arrived at her doorstep. Dante slowly lifted his gaze and locked his dead, predatory eyes on Jamal. He did not yell. He did not scream. He simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod to the 4 massive thugs standing behind him. The men moved with terrifying, practiced efficiency. They were not corporate negotiators. They were brutal enforcers who broke bones for a living. 2 of the men lunged forward, closing the distance between them and my son in a fraction of a second. Jamal did not even have time to scream. One of the thugs reached out with a massive gloved hand and clamped his fingers directly around Jamal's throat. He squeezed with crushing absolute force, instantly cutting off my son's airway. Jamal's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He grabbed at the thug's thick wrist, his manicured fingers scratching desperately at the man leather glove, but he was completely powerless against the brute strength of the enforcer. The second thug grabbed Jamal by the belt and the shoulder of his expensive designer suit. Together they lifted my grown son entirely off the floor. They carried him backward with violent momentum and slammed him brutally against the custom stone wall of my kitchen. The impact was sickeningly loud. The breath was completely knocked out of Jamal's lungs. His expensive leather shoes dangled several inches above the imported tile, kicking frantically at the empty air. Tasha completely lost her mind. The sophisticated, arrogant woman who had looked down on my calloused hands and mocked my history was reduced to a primal, hysterical mess. She screamed at the top of her lungs, a shrill, piercing sound of pure terror that tore through the beautiful house. "Please," Tasha shrieked, dropping to her knees on the hard floor. "Please, do not hurt him. We will get the money. We will find a way to pay you. Just let him go. Please, I am begging you. Do not kill him." Dante ignored her completely. He walked slowly across the kitchen, his heavy boots echoing against the floor. He stepped right up to where his men held Jamal pinned against the stone wall. Jamal was choking his face, turning a dangerous shade of red, then blue. He gasped for oxygen, his eyes pleading for mercy, but there was absolutely no mercy to be found in that room. Dante leaned in extremely close to my son. He invaded Jamal's personal space, his scarred face inches away from Jamal. Terrified, bulging eyes. "You tried to con me," Dante spat, his rough voice dripping with pure concentrated venom. "You looked me in the eye. You shook my hand and you tried to con me with a fake piece of paper." Jamal tried to speak, but the massive hand wrapped around his throat prevented any sound from escaping. He could only let out a pathetic, suffocated gurgle. Tears of sheer terror streamed down his cheeks, mixing with the sweat pouring from his forehead. "You owe me 200 grand. Jamal." Dante continued, his voice rising in volume and intensity. Your pathetic gambling-addicted wife sits at my tables, drinks my liquor, and loses my money, and you think you can disrespect me like this. You think you can waste my time by trying to sell me a government-protected museum. You thought I was stupid, Jamal. You thought you were smarter than me. Dante reached out and grabbed a handful of Jamal-tailored suit jacket, pulling him slightly forward before slamming him back against the stone wall again. Jamal let out a choked cry of pain. "You are dead," Jamal Dante stated, delivering the verdict with absolute chilling certainty. "I am not taking your house. I am not taking your excuses. I am going to let my men beat you until every single bone in your body is broken, and then I am going to do the exact same thing to your wife. You are entirely, completely dead." The air in the room was thick with the promise of extreme impending violence. The thugs tightened their grip, preparing to drag Jamal out of my house and into the back of their black sport utility vehicles. Tasha was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, curling into a tight ball of fear, waiting for the men to come for her next. And through all of this, I stood perfectly still. I remained rooted to my spot in the grand foyer, leaning my weight onto my silver-handled cane. I wore my custom-tailored charcoal suit. I was flanked by Maya and my heavily armed private security contractors. I watched the violent scene unfolding in my kitchen with complete and utter detachment. A normal father would have intervened. A normal father would have shouted for the thugs to let his son go. A normal father would have offered to pay the massive debt out of his own pocket to save his child's life. I had the money. I had millions of dollars in liquid assets. I could have written a check right then and there to make Dante Vance and his men walk out the front door. I could have saved Jamal and Tasha from the brutal, violent consequences of their own reckless greed. But I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to help them. I did not beg for his life. I just watched. I looked at the son I had raised. I saw the pure terror in his eyes as he hung suspended against the wall, choking and gasping for a single breath of air. I remembered the feeling of falling down the steep hardwood stairs. I remembered the sharp, blinding agony of my ribs cracking against the wooden steps. I remembered lying in a pool of my own blood in the freezing, pitch-black darkness of the basement. I remembered the heavy oak door slamming shut and the sound of the deadbolt locking me inside. Jamal had made his choice. He had weighed the value of my life against the value of $1, and he had chosen the dollar. He had looked down at my bleeding body and decided that his debts were more important than his father's survival. He had stripped me of my humanity, and now the universe was stripping him of his. This was not a tragedy. This was a harvest. Jamal was reaping exactly what he had sowed. He had planted seeds of betrayal, greed, and extreme malice, and now he was choking on the bitter, violent fruit of his own labor. Maya stood beside me, her posture rigid and professional. She did not look away either. She watched the legal and physical destruction of the men and women who had tried to steal my empire. My private security contractors kept their hands resting near their weapons, ensuring that the violence of the mob boss did not spill over toward my side of the room. They were a solid, impenetrable wall of protection. Dante raised his hand, preparing to give his men the final signal to drag Jamal out to the vehicles. He was ready to end my son life right there on the pavement outside my beautiful estate. Tasha's screams grew louder, a desperate, hysterical sound that clawed at the walls. But as I stood there watching the mob boss prepare to execute his final judgment, a cold, calculating smile crept across my face. Dante thought he was the ultimate authority in the room. Jamal thought his life was ending at the hands of the syndicate. They both believed that this violent confrontation was the grand finale of the story. They were completely wrong. I had not orchestrated this entire elaborate operation just to let a common street thug finish the job for me. I did not fake my own incompetence, freeze the financial accounts, and return from the dead just to hand my vengeance over to someone else. I am a master builder, and I always oversee the final phase of my own demolitions. I tightened my grip on the silver handle of my cane. I watched my son suffocate against the stone wall. The show was not over yet. The true absolute devastation was only just beginning. The absolute silence of the room was pierced by a sound. It started as a very faint, distant whine. It was a high-pitched, piercing noise echoing from the wealthy tree-lined streets of my exclusive Chicago neighborhood. Dante froze. His hands stopped in midair. The massive enforcer holding Jamal against the wall slightly loosened his crushing grip, turning his thick neck toward the large windows. The sound grew louder. It was no longer a single distant noise. It was multiplying rapidly. One sound became two. Two became five. The distinct, terrifying howl of approaching police sirens cut through the heavy tension in my kitchen. The wailing noise bounced off the surrounding mansions, growing exponentially in volume and intensity. They were not just passing by. They were converging directly on my estate. Tasha stopped sobbing. She lifted her tear-stained face from the floor, her eyes wide with a brand new kind of terror. The violent mob syndicate was bad enough, but the incoming wail of law enforcement meant a completely different kind of destruction. It meant prison. It meant public exposure. It meant the absolute end of her glamorous fake life. Within seconds, the sound of the sirens became deafening. The heavy screeching tires of multiple vehicles skidded to a violent halt on the pavement right outside my iron gates. The bright, blinding afternoon sunlight pouring through my living room windows was suddenly overtaken by a chaotic storm of aggressive strobing colors. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light bounced off the custom crystal chandeliers. The emergency lights reflected off the polished granite kitchen island, painting the faces of every single person in the room with the undeniable, terrifying colors of the police. The realization hit the criminal syndicate like a physical blow. Dante realized instantly that his private off-the-books real estate transaction had just turned into a massive, highly visible disaster. He barked a harsh, guttural order to his men. The enforcer immediately released his grip on Jamal. Jamal fell from the stone wall like a sack of dead weight. He hit the imported tile floor with a heavy thud, coughing violently and gasping for oxygen. He clutched his bruised throat, vomiting a mixture of bile and fear onto the pristine floor. He was completely broken, crawling away from the men who had just tried to kill him, only to realize that the red and blue lights flashing through the windows meant his nightmare was just changing shapes. The mob lawyer scrambled backward, frantically shoving his dirty notary stamps and his fraudulent closing documents into his worn leather briefcase. He wanted to distance himself from the toxic paperwork, but it was far too late. The entire house was already bathed in the flashing lights of the authorities. Dante turned his massive, scarred face toward me. The veins in his thick neck bulged with explosive, murderous rage. He realized that the heavily armed private security contractors standing beside me were not just here to protect me from him. They were here to keep him contained until the police arrived. He believed that I had set him up. He believed that I had orchestrated a federal sting operation to trap his entire syndicate inside my home. "You called the cops!" Dante roared, his voice shaking the walls of the grand foyer. He did not care about the flashing lights anymore. He only cared about the betrayal. He reached his massive hand inside his dark, tailored jacket. With blinding speed, the mob boss pulled out a heavy black firearm. He raised the weapon and pointed the steel barrel directly at my chest. He was a violent man pushed into a corner, and he was ready to kill me right there in my own hallway. But I was not standing alone. Maya did not even flinch. My two private military contractors moved with lethal, practiced precision. Before Dante could even steady his aim, my guards had already drawn their own high-powered tactical weapons. They stepped smoothly in front of me, raising their firearms and aiming the laser sights directly at the center of the mob boss' forehead. The massive living room transformed instantly into a deadly high-stakes standoff. The mob thugs instinctively reached for their own concealed weapons, but they were completely outmatched. My security team had the tactical high ground, the superior firepower, and the absolute element of surprise. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like it could shatter the glass windows. If a single person in that room twitched, the beautiful kitchen I had designed for my late wife was going to turn into a horrific bloodbath. I did not break eye contact with the furious mob boss. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I kept my weight firmly planted on my silver-handled cane, standing tall and resolute behind my wall of armed protection. My breathing was completely steady. I was a man who had built an auto empire by looking danger directly in the eye and refusing to blink. "I did not call them for you, Dante," I replied. My voice was smooth, resonant, and entirely devoid of any fear. The calm certainty in my tone cut through the chaos of the flashing lights and the wailing sirens. Dante kept his weapon raised, his eyes darting between the laser sights aimed at his head and my calm expression. He was trying to calculate his odds of survival, and he knew they were dropping to 0 by the second. I let my gaze drop slowly to the heavy aluminum briefcase sitting open on my granite island. The $300,000 in crisp, untraceable bills sat fully exposed under the bright lights. Then I looked back up at the violent criminal standing in my home. "But since you are standing in my living room with a loaded weapon," I continued, letting every single word carry the heavy weight of the law. "And since you are carrying a briefcase full of undocumented cash on a federally protected property, I strongly suggest you drop it." Dante knew he was completely trapped. He knew that firing his weapon would mean his instant death at the hands of my highly trained guards. He also knew that being caught by the police with a drawn firearm and a mountain of dirty cash would guarantee him a life sentence in a federal maximum security prison. His chest heaved with suppressed rage, but his survival instinct finally overpowered his pride. He slowly lowered his weapon, dropping the heavy black firearm onto the hardwood floor. He raised his hands in the air, signaling his men to stand down and do the same. The standoff was broken, but the true devastation was only just arriving. The police did not just knock politely on my heavy oak front doors. Maya had not just called the local precinct for a simple wellness check. She was a ruthless corporate attorney, and she had coordinated this entire elaborate operation with the district attorney of Cook County hours ago. She had provided them with the high-definition video evidence of Jamal bribing the corrupt doctor. She had provided them with the audio recordings of the extortion plot. She had handed the authorities a perfectly wrapped, legally airtight criminal conspiracy on a silver platter. The house was completely surrounded by heavily armed officers. They had locked down the entire perimeter, blocking the street and trapping the syndicate vehicles in the driveway. Suddenly, a massive, deafening crash echoed from the back of the estate. The heavy reinforced glass doors leading out to my manicured patio completely shattered, sending thousands of sharp fragments raining down onto the imported tile. They did not wait for an invitation. A Chicago Special Weapons and Tactics team poured into the house like a relentless, unstoppable wave of dark armor. Men dressed in heavy black tactical gear, carrying advanced assault rifles, flooded into the living room and the kitchen. Red laser sights swept rapidly across the room, painting the chests of Dante, his thugs, Jamal, and Tasha. The overwhelming noise of their heavy boots and their commanding voices completely filled the massive house. "Get on the ground!" The lead tactical officer roared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Everybody on the ground right now, show me your hands." The violent mob thugs who had just been choking the life out of my son immediately dropped to their knees, lacing their fingers behind their heads. Dante slowly lowered himself to the floor, glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, as a tactical officer pressed a heavy boot into his back and slapped steel handcuffs around his thick wrists. Tasha let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream, throwing herself flat against the broken glass on the floor, covering her head. As the heavily armed officers swarmed the room, Jamal was already on the ground, still coughing up bile. His expensive suit ruined his grand escape plan, completely incinerated. He pressed his face into the cold tile, crying like a broken, pathetic child as the red laser sights danced across his back. Maya and I stood perfectly still by the front entrance. My private security contractors slowly lowered their weapons, stepping aside to let the authorities take absolute control of the room. The trap had not just sprung, it had completely crushed every single enemy who had dared to step foot inside my home. The ultimate checkmate was achieved, and my son was finally going to face the catastrophic consequences of his own boundless greed. 6 months have passed since the flashing red and blue police lights illuminated the long, circular driveway of my estate. The air in Chicago feels entirely different now. It feels lighter and incredibly clean. The heavy toxic fog of betrayal that had settled over my home has been completely burned away by the harsh, uncompromising light of the federal justice system. The courts moved with a terrifying and relentless speed when presented with the mountain of high-definition digital evidence Maya and I had meticulously compiled. There were no lengthy, dramatic trials. There were no tear-filled testimonies in front of a sympathetic jury. The digital evidence was absolute and the legal consequences were catastrophic. Jamal stood in front of a federal judge wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit, completely stripped of his custom-tailored suits and his unearned arrogance. He pleaded guilty to attempted murder, aggravated elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge did not look at him with a single ounce of pity. She looked at him as a violent predator who had tried to bury his own father in the dark for a quick payday. Jamal was sentenced to 15 hard years in a federal penitentiary. That is 15 years of staring at cold concrete walls, thinking about the hardwood basement stairs, and the pitch-black room he tried to leave me in. He will spend every single day of the next decade and a half realizing that his boundless greed cost him the only man who ever truly supported him. Tasha fared no better. Her hysterical sobbing in the courtroom did not save her from the cold, hard reality of her actions. For her role in the conspiracy, the medical fraud, and the attempted theft of a federally protected property, she was sentenced to 10 years behind bars. 10 years without her exclusive country club memberships, her imported champagne, and her high society friends. The grand fake life she had built on the foundation of my hard work was completely incinerated and reduced to a sterile prison identification number. The wealthy women she used to impress will never speak her name again, except as a cautionary tale of ultimate disgrace. But the destruction did not stop with my son and his wife. The shockwave of their colossal stupidity took down everyone who had dared to touch this conspiracy. Dante Vance and his violent syndicate were completely dismantled. The authorities used the audio recordings, the video footage, and the $300,000 in undocumented cash seized in my kitchen to tear his entire underground operation apart from the root. The mob boss, who had threatened to break bones and take lives, is currently sitting in a maximum security cell facing the rest of his natural life behind bars. And the corrupt psychiatrist, the man who had sold his medical oath for $10,000 in a manila envelope, lost absolutely everything. His medical license was permanently revoked. His practice was seized, and he was locked away in federal prison for medical fraud. The entire rotten tree had been pulled up by its roots and thrown into the fire. I sit on the expansive back porch of my custom-built Chicago estate. The late afternoon sun is casting a warm, golden glow over the manicured lawn. The air is quiet, peaceful, and entirely my own. I reach into the breast pocket of my linen shirt and pull out a premium hand-rolled cigar. I strike a match, letting the small flame flare up, and I take a long, slow drag. The rich, earthy smoke fills my lungs, carrying the taste of absolute victory. I lean back in my heavy wooden rocking chair, listening to the gentle rustling of the ancient oak trees that line the edge of my property. My ribs have fully healed. The scar near my hairline is just a faint, faded line. The physical wounds are gone, and the emotional ones have been permanently sealed with the ironclad satisfaction of absolute justice. Maya sits at the wrought iron patio table right next to me. She is not wearing her usual sharp navy blue designer suit today. She is wearing a comfortable, elegant sundress with her laptop open in front of her, surrounded by stacks of crisp official legal documents. She is smiling a genuine warm smile that has nothing to do with destroying corporate enemies. She is going over the final certified paperwork for the Vivian Scholarship Fund. The multi-million-dollar endowment is officially fully funded and operational. The irony is beautifully profound. The massive auto empire fortune that Jamal had tried to steal, the money he had been willing to kill his own father to get his hands on, is now safely locked away in a trust dedicated entirely to the memory of his late mother. It will be used to send hundreds of bright, hard-working young black men and women from the south side of Chicago to college. It will build futures for kids who actually know the value of a dollar. Kids who know what it means to struggle and fight for everything they have. Jamal Greed had inadvertently funded a legacy of absolute brilliance. I take another slow, deliberate pull from my cigar and look out over the sprawling, perfectly green lawn of my estate. I think about the dark, freezing basement. I think about the heavy oak door slamming shut and the metallic click of the deadbolt locking me inside. I think about the excruciating pain in my chest as I lay bleeding on the cold concrete. They thought I was just an old, weak, senile man who had outlived his usefulness. They thought I was a simple obstacle that could just be shoved down a flight of stairs and completely forgotten. They were completely wrong. I did not just survive a violent, cowardly assassination attempt. I did not just crawl out of the dark and call the police like a helpless victim. I orchestrated a flawless legal and financial execution. I let them build their own gallows. I let them tie their own nooses. And I let their own blinding, sociopathic greed pull the lever. I stripped them of their money, their freedom, their dignity, and their future. And I did it all while sitting in a medical bed watching them on a digital tablet. I built my auto empire from the dirt, and I proved that I am still the absolute master of my domain. I exhale a thick cloud of cigar smoke into the warm Chicago evening air. I look at Maya, the daughter of my sister, the brilliant mind who helped me tear the wolves to pieces. She is my real family now. Blood does not make a family. Respect does. Respect. And in my house, if you do not have respect, you lose absolutely everything. Fade to black. A man who builds an empire from the dirt knows the true value of respect. When you hand an ungrateful child everything they never worked for, you create a monster. Real strength is not about wealth, but integrity and loyalty. Betrayal will always face the ultimate and absolute consequence.